Call the meeting of the Newbury Selectboard to order at 7:18 p.m. on April 25th, 2022. First thing for public announcements. This meeting is being broadcast on local cable TV and recorded for rebroadcast on local cable channels and is available on the internet. The meeting is also accessible by remote participation. Below. If you are watching this on cable and would like to dial in by phone, the phone number is 646-558-8656. And whether by phone or on the internet, the meeting ID is 827-5519-2336 with passcode 814146. So there's an Arbor Day, or a series of Arbor Day events organized by the West Newbury Tree Committee this coming Saturday, April 30th, the first one starts at 10 a.m. from 10 to noon on the library grounds, where there's a pickup of tree seedlings, have questions answered regarding trees by people on the tree committee. And then from 12 to 1:30, there's a walk around the Gold Pond area with information regarding tree identification and the history of New England forests. That's going to be pretty interesting. On Saturday, May 14th, we have a special annual town meeting. That's at 9 a.m. at the bandstand. There is a town election this coming Monday, May 2nd. And that starts what time is it? 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Please cast your vote. There's the May to June Council on Aging newsletter was just released, and there's a lot of stuff in there. Running through it, it's interesting. It's amazing how many events are organized. If you look at the month of May, for instance, I think there was an event almost every single day of the month, at least every single work day of the month, and sometimes there were 4 or 5 events in a single day. So there's a lot of programming available. And if you'd like to subscribe to town email announcements, go to wnewbury.org/subscribe and sign up for various boards or for broader information.
I'd just like to just thank people that participated in the cleanup over the weekend. That's all.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, great. Yeah, that's always a good thing. It's nice to walk around town now, and there's not a piece of garbage to be found for a few weeks, so it's good. Okay, so the first item of regular business is a request for appointment to Board of Fire Engineers. And I guess the first thing we should do is talk about thoughts on this, the structure of the number of people on the board. We have 5 applicants, Bob Evans and Mike Dwyer are both here tonight. I don't know if anybody's online. Okay,
Ben's online. Yep.
Ben is online. Okay, great. Yeah, so we have a total of 5 applicants, and so I think there's some thought on the board that maybe we should take advantage of 5 applicants and increase the membership of the Board of Fire Engineers to 5. It's for various reasons. There probably are reasons to go either way, But included in the reasons to consider a change to 5 is sort of thinking about the future and trying to include a couple of more people so that as we all sort of move on through life, that there are younger people in the mix. And it's not just an age thing, but it I think helps the organization to have people moving up, or helps any organization have people moving up through the structure.
To gain some executive experience.
Right. So, Wendy, did you or do you have any other thoughts on that?
Well, our other thought is, and Mike is here, but we felt that with Mike's new duties, that it may be that additional personnel would be helpful in terms of lightening the load somewhat. And Rick brought up the point of bringing in new blood, that it's also useful to people to not feel that there's a ceiling and that there's never going to be a way to move up. So I think there's a lot of reasons right for this year at least to attempt that, and we have 5 what we felt were good applicants. So that's our thoughts.
By the way, Dave, I just realized I think I referred to you as Bob.
All right.
I forgot that you're a multi-billionaire too.
Oh, yeah. No way.
We were just talking about me.
I said the yeah, no, sorry. Yeah.
Didn't sound quite right, but
That's all right. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I guess with that lead-in, I would move to appoint Dave Evans, Mike Dwyer, Ben Janelle, Mark Marlowe, and Cooper Carithia as fire engineers.
Second.
Is it appropriate to ask Mike what he considers 5 members or?
Sure.
Is it appropriate as a member? I'm currently a member of the board, so.
Yeah. Well, I think most, I don't think it's ever appropriate. I mean,
Yeah.
it's appropriate to hear from everybody, and Dave too, if he has thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you raise some valid points. I am always a fan of bringing in new blood. And I like Archie's comment about helping people sort of build out their resume and get some experience when it comes to the decision making that goes along with the board, the decisions that the board of engineers are responsible for. I was happy Angus and I had a discussion about really getting out the word to everybody what the board of engineers is tasked with, and that is sort of the financial control of the fire department, and also initiating the appointments for the membership through the year. I think the pros to a 3-member board is it sort of keeps things a little bit more consistent with what we're responsible for, the day-to-day responsibilities that the fire chief's responsible for and the board's responsible for, which sometimes are the same thing, sometimes it's very different. I think 5 certainly expands things in a good way, but I mean, there's really pros and cons to both. I think beyond 5 would be a challenge.
Right. Yeah, and I know there was history going back a few years of more, and I think it's one point to think that on.
Yeah, and sometimes the biggest challenge is as the years go on, different people get appointed, not reappointed, and it almost takes us 6 months to a year to catch up to where we need to be to start making progress. And the last thing we want to do is go backwards. We want to continue to go forward. We've all done. Everybody on the board from right now all the way through the past in time have done a great job for the fire department.
Yeah.
I will add one thing while I'm up here and have the microphone. There's a blood pressure clinic
Tomorrow,
tomorrow.
1 to
Council on
2.
Aging.
1 to 2.
So please come if you'd like to get your blood pressure screened. It's Dave's job, I'm not mine. But I figured I'd take the time to use the.
I work with Christine, that's what I do.
Yeah.
And I supply
Do you
them
want to
with,
speak on that?
I'm good.
But if you gave your blood last week, you gotta check now.
Yeah. So I don't know if that helps, probably.
Okay, yeah.
So I imagine it'd be a little bit of an adjustment if you're taking on 2 additional members, and dividing up responsibilities.
It can be, but those are 2 members that have been on the department for quite a while and have experience, various degrees of experience that could be an asset.
So, when it, when you have a meeting of the fire engineers, then, presumably, or hopefully, all 5, or certainly 4 out of 5, or I would go to 10. But then there are a certain number of responsibilities, and I don't know exactly what those are, and I have an idea of what some of them are. But there's a certain number of responsibilities that, that are outside of meetings that are involved with, sort of operational, near-term operational decisions and a certain amount of sort of base work that has to be done to keep everything working. And we're assuming, I think, that work can be then divvied up so that people get, now that there will be 5, that people who haven't had that experience in the past will get that experience and will, it will build their ability to contribute.
Yeah, really the purpose behind the engineers is we will, once the appointments are finalized through the select board, we will meet, preferred method is to meet in person as a complete group, so as a complete board. And at that point, that's when we will take on sort of what responsibilities going forward different members will have. We'll discuss capital plan, we'll talk about budgets, and we'll talk about appointing members, appointing different ranks, setting, different levels of expectations and goals throughout the year. And then once that's completed, throughout the year, our responsibility is going to be for capital assets, special requests, things that go above and beyond our budget, budget planning. That'll end up being the responsibility of the board.
Okay.
But the fire department operations will turn to sort of the chain of command, the chief, all the way down to the last hire firefighter.
Okay.
And that's separate from the board.
Okay.
So operational control, things of that matter will be handled through the fire department structure. The board will be separate from that.
This is funny, this is a little confusing to me, we're in our packet tonight was, excerpts from Mass General Law, Chapter 48, fire departments and fire districts. And so we as the select board appoint, and then it says, Section 46, they shall immediately after such appointment notify each of said engineers to be the time and place designated. I don't know who they is at this point, I don't know if that's you or us, but I guess obviously, they need to be.
They need to be sworn in first.
Okay.
Yeah, so they'll be sworn in and then we'll pick a date that's mutually agreed upon by everybody.
Yeah, okay,
We meet at the fire station.
great.
Is it typically meeting monthly, or what's the frequency?
It's not often monthly, but it's as needed. Yeah. And then again, the makeup of sort of that schedule, can be discussed at any time. And then anytime we need to meet, we post a meeting. Very rarely is there emergencies that we need to make decisions right away from a board perspective.
So your meetings, they do have to all then, they are posted meetings then?
They're posted, yes.
I And would you be friendly to a non-fire engineer participant?
No, I think we've always, as far as a non-firefighter member of the
Yeah.
board.
Yeah, if
I
I
would
were to
just
sit in
some-
as a public.
Oh, I know.
No, it's open, they're open, so yeah, anybody can
We've
come.
had,
I'm
we've had
being a
some,
little tongue in cheek.
we've
I
had
got right
some,
over.
we've had some great visitors.
Yes.
And, sometimes very animated, but that's okay. We don't like-
There is a risk we might learn something.
Always happy to have somebody.
Absolutely.
Great, okay. Any other
Great,
discussion?
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
We'll notify all of the members and get them sworn in first.
I'll actually follow up with an email for everybody.
Thank you.
And then you can, as long as I'm in the office, you can get sworn in.
Thanks for coming in.
Any reason for me to stay?
No, I think,
Unless you want to watch the meeting.
Hey, good thing on the process.
I think we're good. We do have a item coming up about truck traffic on Rocks Village Bridge.
I'm
All
always.
right, so.
Truck traffic,
Yeah, traffic and bridge.
Black and white.
Yeah,
but lack thereof.
lack of any traffic. Okay, great, well, thanks. Yeah, and our next item is update on the request for temporary road closure of the portion of Church Street for use of staging area for Rocks Village Bridge repairs.
So at this point, the contractor that's been in touch with DPW isn't yet under contract with Mass DOT. So, my recommendation is to wait till there's that vendor or some other vendor is formally under contract, and that there would be at that point a request, a more formal request. But I think at this point, we just wanted to make sure that it's generally going to be agreeable to use, a portion of Church Street as a staging area, because it's factors into the prospective contractors' estimate of project costs in terms of whether there's staging right there as opposed to someplace different. So, it's not a formal request, but you can see we provided the questions that had come up and largely got responses. The one thing that not reflected in that correspondence is the idea of keeping a portion of Church Street closest to the bridge available for cars coming to and from. I did talk to Wayne about that. I know he did have some concerns about that, just in terms of the kind of the interest of prioritizing the bridge repair over maybe recreational boating. So I think that's going to need to get into the specifics of what the board's asking for and what the contractor, I think the contractor's got to really be specifically involved with that.
Yeah.
Before something's kind of agreed to or not.
I think is the boat ramp actually owned by the state?
Yeah,
Yeah, so we might, I don't know how we would work that out, but can we legally not make it accessible? I'm guessing we probably can't. Hey, Laura?
Hi, guys.
They also didn't address the traffic flow issue. Traffic was gonna be coming out both ends. That was something that we had talked about a little bit, if they could propose.
I think, I recall it talking about like 2 lengths of car parking on one end to keep that open.
I think I was referring to if they're gonna be only going out the bridge end,
Mhm.
Ferry Lane, or they're gonna be going out the other end as well. Will that just be a dead end fence at the junction with Church Street?
Okay, all right. I hadn't written that in my notes. I may have misunderstood that from the last discussion.
You think that they would, just from an operational standpoint, you think they want access from both ends because, if they have to stage equipment and stage materials, having access from more than one point means more than one direction means you have to do less jockeying around and stuff.
Just worried about the traffic impacts.
Yeah. But the traffic is much reduced through there right now.
Oh, yeah.
You almost live on a dead end street.
All right, so once we have, a more formal request that'll be back before you. Just wanted to provide the update on the correspondence since then, and I'll follow up on that one question, Wendy. And I had included in the packet the police report, just as background. Rick had mentioned it would be good to have that, so I don't know if there's anything in there you want to talk about, or it's just.
I had a related question to that. Is there any recourse to the communities like the school district? In other words, do we have any, do the communities and the school district and anyone else have any recourse to sue this trucking company for substantial additional costs and the cost of inconvenience and, certainly longer bus rides and all those kinds of things that were a direct responsibility of this trucking company.
Yeah.
Is that something that we should pursue?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I've been wondering that, and I've actually been asked by several people if the town has any legal recourse. And yeah, you mentioned the school district, whether it be Pentucket or Whittier. Each of the school districts are going to probably see significantly higher transportation costs. And I guess I'm wondering if we should ask town council if they think that there is a legitimate case. It's going to be harder. I did some real rough math. Estimating increased time I found out roughly how many people a day, somewhere in the range of 7,000 trips a day across the bridge prior to the closure.
Really, that many?
Yeah, and then did the rough estimate, my own personal estimate of the increased time, the average increased time, I think I assumed about 10 minutes per person, because you in the worst case, you lived on one side of the bridge and had to get right to the other side. That would be the worst case, but most people aren't going to be the worst case. And then estimated additional mileage and fuel and but math I did, it comes out to perhaps in the range of $50,000 a day societal cost for that bridge to be closed right now. And that wasn't even accounting for the school bus transportation, for the complexity.
Right.
Because that's not just a car. So yeah, it's I don't think we can try to go after societal costs, but bus transportation for the schools is a lot more tangible,
measurable thing.
Right. I'm sure there are businesses that are going to take a hit, but that's probably a lot harder to go after.
I don't know, but I just wonder if at least we should.
I think we should pursue. We should find out whether or not it's something that we can pursue.
I'll be back.
Okay.
If you're focused on the transportation.
Right. I think that's probably the only place where we have a real case is in the school district. And both for Pentucket and for Whittier.
I was gonna say, do you want me to put in my fuel reimbursement costs?
Well, that's what I'm saying is that there's, there are,
Thanks, Mike.
7,000 individual trips. I mean, some of those are, have a good night. Good night, yeah, I mean, some of those, there are a lot of costs associated. There's no way we can hold somebody liable for, but the things that are tangible, we should at least explore whether or not there is a case. The school district's up against the wall as far as transportation costs are concerned.
So would we ask the school district to bring it forward rather than leave it?
I'm I'm not sure, and that's why it seems to me it's something we should ask town council their thoughts on. You know, for, you know, relatively short conversation, we should be able to figure out whether or not there's something that the town or the districts, you know, the you know, regional school and school district might be able to, so.
All right, I can look into that.
Okay. So, you know, this is, yeah, it's really the next item rolls into the next item is the request to Mass DOT restrict truck traffic from the Roxville Bridge. And I personally think that makes sense. But I think we might have to ask them to go a little farther than that too. You know, I think, you know, there was a sign that was restricting 12 feet 6 inches. And clearly the driver didn't see or didn't pay attention to that sign. In the police report I saw, it reported that he didn't see the sign. But if there's a sign that closes the bridge to trucks, is there going to be the driver that doesn't see the sign? You know, Star Drive is a classic example, you know, that every year, or I assume it still happens. I remember it used to happen, you know, a few times a year.
It's much more frequent in the past.
Somebody would get on Star Drive with a truck and whack a bridge, and I guess they built the bridges pretty sturdy because they seemed like they took the hit. I think there ought to be, you know, we should have a conversation with Mass DOT about whether or not there is some kind of mechanical way to ensure that higher trucks can't damage the bridge. You know, that might be something that senses and has flashing lights that, you know, that says, you know, you're over height. But it seems to me that there ought to be some, you know, we can't depend upon people reading the signs and not going where they're not supposed to go. And in this case, you know, the cost, if the number that I threw out was realistic at all, $50,000 a day, in 200 days, or in 20 days, I mean, that's $1 million. You know, so you can probably play with the numbers however you want, but let's just say the cost is very high to not have that bridge open. So I don't think it's unreasonable for us to ask Mass DOT to consider some other exclusionary system that prevents people from driving onto the bridge with a big truck.
So you're saying not exclude trucks, but just.
Oh, no, I would do both. I think, I think it's, it's belt and suspenders. Because the belt alone didn't work, you know, so you throw on this.
But if it was a flashing light, then that, you know, arguably would be more effective than printed sign.
I think so, yeah, exactly, you know, so only if your sense is over height, you know, maybe you have some kind of a sensor up above. And I'm not gonna I'm not gonna try to suggest what that ought to be, but they've gotta exist. Some kind of a sensor up above that if you trigger it, then there are bright lights, you know, warning lights that would flash. And yeah, we could do that too, yeah. But then,
Or more height restriction prior to the bridge, like with chains. So if you hit them, you'll know.
yeah, but the problem is that if, say, on this kind of vehicle with, you know, he had a container on it, and if there were chains, he probably wouldn't have even heard it. He probably wouldn't have known that he was hitting it. It wasn't like it would have hit his cab. It was hitting the container that was sitting on top of a flatbed behind it.
Piece of metal that catches it.
Yeah, well, you don't want
Before you get
something
the
that, you don't want to create a new hazard,
Yeah.
you know, but you want to sense that there is something over height and then provide a visual warning. Again, I'm not gonna be the bridge engineer, you know, the bridge safety systems engineer, but I think we need something better than just signs.
So is the mayor asking for us to join in their request?
Yeah,
That was the.
That was
city
how I
council.
read it.
City, so the city council put in the request to us and the mayor.
Okay. And did they ask Merrimack?
I don't believe they included Merrimack.
Yeah,
think
and
it
that's-
was-
from what I read,
just
they were
because it's actually
questioning,
from us.
yeah, I think they were just talking with the two communities that actually are on the, the bridge is connected to.
The entrances to the bridge, yeah. Yeah, it was just us and Haverhill and us.
So do we need a motion to?
I think we do, and he's not here to vote, but so I'm sure he would, but we have, in any event, we have a majority.
I'm just trying to see what the language needs to be.
I think it's in that second letter. The letter from the council president, page
Yeah,
4.
or, I mean, we could, whatever letter you want to write, but I think it would be, the motion would be to whether to vote to send a letter to Mass DOT requesting that they designate a permanent truck restriction for the bridge, but however we write it, is however you want it written.
Yeah.
So separate requests. I thought they were asking us to join in their request.
I mean, you could sign on to their request, but if you wanted to go further, as Rick is saying, you could just put something on your letterhead.
Yeah, okay, so, well, I would make a motion then that we make a request to Mass DOT to put a truck restriction, not an exclusion, but a truck restriction, so they have to figure out what that restriction is on that bridge, but to also include a system, an appropriate system for sensing and warning overheight vehicles.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Done with that. So next item is an update on the MBTA community legislation in response to the questionnaire due to state DHCD on by May 2nd, 2022.
Okay, and I think all of these questions are definitely things that, I can work with Leah to complete. I think the one that I really just wanted to make sure I was clear on is what's shown as item 5B1, which is the name of the person who will be responsible for compliance with section 3A of chapter 40A.
And
We heard that the planning board said that it was you.
Oh, I didn't hear them. I'm fine if it's me. I wanted that to be, however it should, I think it ought to be either myself or the chair of the select board. But I think it'll, entail getting some number of correspondences with increasing urgency of what are you doing? Have you done it yet? Where are you on,
Right.
So I think it ought to be,
I moved to designate town manager
okay.
as the responsible individual for MBTA communities questions.
Second.
It's probably not just questions, but it's very phrasing here.
Compliance.
For compliance, yeah.
Compliance, there we go.
The second, sir.
Yeah, great, thanks. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Angus.
Sure. Now, as you may have noted, one of the things that we need to submit is the meeting minutes of the presentation the planning board gave about a month ago.
Yeah.
So I just, where that specific question wasn't resolved, I just want to make sure there's a clear record of who's the responsible
Okay.
entity.
So those minutes are done.
If, I'm not sure if they are, if they're not, but if they're not, it says you can provide them later. So I don't know, it was March 14th. I don't recall if those are already approved or not.
So the next item is the request for authorization to submit Bill Pond ANRAD to Conservation Commission. I don't have any questions about that. I move that we authorize the submission of Bill Pond ANRAD to Conservation Commission, and that has Angus and signature on it.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
inspection bylaw.
Do you want to wait until Archie's back?
Sure.
Just
why don't we
since
do
he's-
that? Yeah.
Since he's on that topic.
And I guess what I'm going to propose is that we're going to actually switch two items here, because Mark has come in for one particular discussion. Mark and I spoke on the phone, and he agreed that he would come on up and speak for himself, not for the investment policy committee, but for himself. So we'll take item L out of order and push item F to later in the agenda. So item L is discussion of West Newbury investment policy statement and potential to incorporate guidelines and or requirements regarding divestment from fossil fuels. Now, actually, in
Wait.
retrospect, it is unfortunate that Archie isn't here.
Yeah,
because-
and Archie had actually sent a note over the weekend to me, just
Okay.
curious about where that came from.
Okay.
So I don't want to delay Lark, but if,
I'm happy to wait. Why don't we see how, he's actually at the Concom, public, is that a public?
is a listening
Oh,
session
yeah.
Q&A? Yeah.
Yeah, an update on
I have
the,
that for a while, it's fine.
okay, all right, great. Then we won't take it out of order right now, but we will go by item F right now. And review and make recommendations on proposed warrant articles, including proposed FY 23 operating budget with the FinCom recommendation, the two or three changes recommended by FinCom.
Great.
The spring annual and special town meetings scheduled for March 14th or May 14th.
Great.
So the three changes were an increase to the FinCom budget of $20,000, a reduction of $18,000 to the waste disposal
That's right.
portion of the Board of Health, and third.
The support for the library 10-hour week position for
And that was
a little over $8,600.
Yeah, okay.
8,600.
Okay.
So yeah, I wanted to, since as you know, we put the proposed budget in the FinCom booklet, and it's got a column for FinCom recommended and a column for Select Board. And where, when you referred the budget, those three lines were different. I wanted to see if
Yeah.
there was alignment, in which case we'd put, we'd still put both columns, Select Board and FinCom.
Okay.
So the question is whether those, you're in agreement with those
Okay.
three changes to
I know
FinCom.
you said that Blake Seal had he expressed some concern to you.
Yeah,
about
I did.
The 20,000 offset, the 20,000 addition
Yep.
to the FinCom was potentially to correct that.
Mhm.
Sorry, that's
Yep.
great.
Yep.
I got my 11 cents. All right, good. Who was it now?
So yes, Blake did express some concern. We spoke again last week about the reduction to the solid waste line by about 18,000, which the FinCom had made based on actual tonnage, which did tend to be lower than the 1,600 tons that the budget anticipated. And I talked through with Blake to say, how big a concern is it? I have assured Blake that the town of West Newbury will pay its bills. So there's not a scenario where, the tonnage is largely beyond the town's control. The town can do public education and so forth, but it is what it is. And we're going to pay the bill. And I think that was the rationale of the FinCom in adding 20 grand to their reserve fund, is if they got it wrong, the funding is still in the budget. It would just require a reserve fund transfer to pay it. Blake mentioned to me when we spoke last week that there was a surcharge in one of the recent solid waste hauling invoices because of the increase in fuel, which is allowable under the contract. And that was about $1,200 for the month. So he just wanted to use that to illustrate that it's not all about tonnage and that there's other factors and that we need to make sure we're budgeting properly. I did reach out to him Thursday evening to make sure he knew this would be on tonight's agenda. And I said, if you have any comments or want to, make your case, send something to me ahead of time or show up at the meeting. I think, when we talked it through, I think he's comfortable. I think he thinks it might be a little tight, but he also knows, and he's correct, that if the FinCom's number is wrong, we're still gonna find the money and pay the bill. So I think I'm comfortable recommending the board support the FinCom's number. I think in the interest of having a single set of numbers presented to the voters, where I don't think it's a material difference. It's really a matter of trying to see the future and what tonnage may be.
Well, also, I think the wild card is, cost of recyclables in particular, or the cost.
Well, that is a different line within the Board of Health
Okay.
budget. That's a separate,
Okay,
and
so
that's,
that is- all right.
yeah, and we did reduce the budget for that based on the trends year to date and the fact that we are starting to see very modest, but we are starting to see revenues from recycling once again.
Okay.
So the recycling line had already been reduced within the budget process, within the budget that I put forward. It was the solid waste line that the FinCom had focused on. So Archie, the board's just reviewing the 3 line item changes to the budget. So
I guess the other one is the $8,600 for the library, and does anybody have any, personally, I'm okay with that, but what do you think of that? Yeah.
Well, I don't want to mess up the whole budget over that amount of money, so. I want us to have all be in agreement, so. It didn't like it, especially until we have the wage study and everything else, but,
Okay, yeah, I know we talked about it earlier, and I hadn't supported it, but at this point in the grand scheme of things, it seems that personally. Okay,
okay,
all right, so I guess I would move that we accept the changes proposed on the annual town meeting warrant in the line item budget by the finance committee. All in favor?
Aye.
all right, since you do have the kind of latest draft annual and special town meeting warrants in front of you, if you found any wordsmithing or in there, now's kind of like your last chance. It's got to be posted Friday, so if you found something really material after now, it's not like we would cover our ears, but there are a couple of blanks to fill in just on what for the new bylaws, just picking a number.
Yep.
The expedient thing to do would be to tack them on at the end. I think probably the right thing to do would be to fit them within in a way that makes sense and renumber the others accordingly, but that creates its own issues of cross references. They need to be updated. So
yeah, that would be hard.
yeah, I mean, the bylaws really honestly need a recodification, but that's a whole other thing that we've been talking about for a while, and that's not going to happen overnight. So we'll probably just put them on at the end in whatever order makes the most sense. So, but that's the only blanks in the draft warrants is what sections those new bylaws would be assigned.
Well, I would, with the exception of those blanks that haven't been filled in yet, I would propose that we accept the town meeting warrants for both the annual and special town meeting. For May 14th.
Great, thanks. Once we actually, Jim, I think has those for signature, so we'll get those posted Friday.
Okay, so why don't we, now that Archie's back, why don't we flip back to item F, review updated, so it's just one item back, the updated proposed wetland protection bylaw. Do you have any new thoughts, Archie?
You serious? I just think that this new bylaw is biggest overreach. It is gonna create so much work for the Conservation Commission. As I just told them now, I've done a random study of just driving around and counting different properties that I would assume that would be affected by this bylaw. I just asked them now and they answered my question. So in addition, so I would say that is well over 100 properties that would have what I call drainage ditches and they call intermittent streams on their frontage next to the road. Unrelated to any of the other wetlands issues that I'm not even gonna get into, the vernal pools and all that kind of stuff. So I'd say that that's well over 100. But because most roads in West Newbury are not 4-lane highways, the 100-foot setback would thereby include everyone on the other side of the street, even though the swale is on the opposite side of the street. The street is not 100 feet wide, so any effect would all any setback would affect in the across the street dimension, which would then affect the people across the street. So that basically doubles the number of properties that will then be subject to having to get a come before the board, excuse me, come before the Conservation Commission if they want to trim their shrubs on the other side of the street. So it's doubling it. So now I'm going to say that there are hundreds of properties that will be subject to this new bylaw, and it's going to, homeowners are going to be just sadly mistaken when they find they have to file with the Conservation Commission if they want to put salt on their driveway, or they want to mow the lawn near the mailbox, or if they want to move their mailbox. Just very minor activities, and that I just think it's going to make the residents of the town very angry with town government. The town government is supposed to work for the citizens, not to be against them. The tone of this bylaw, I can go on and on, but I'll give you one sentence that really bothers me. Just the tone of the bylaw is punitive and restrictive. It's at a minimum, these regulations, the new regulations that have not yet been formulated. So in other words, they have the bylaw, but the regulations are going to say do this at a minimum, and then we shall reiterate the terms in this bylaw, define additional terms and requirements not inconsistent with the bylaw. So in other words, this is just the beginning. They haven't even defined the actual regulations that will be put into effect, that will be even more stringent and impose filing and in consultant fees. Well, I don't like to talk to the citizens of the community with that kind of tone. I just find it like it sounds like we're talking to I don't know, like somebody under prison watch. It just doesn't make sense to me how punitive the tone of this whole bylaw is. No, I can go on, but there's a couple of points.
I don't disagree. I mean, I think the town would do well to have a wetlands bylaw that allowed us to make certain discretionary changes or sort of overages to the state wetlands bylaw, but I think that this goes quite a bit too far, and it's my personal take on it. I know there's a lot of work that's gone into it, but think it's right at this point.
Archie, did you ask if they had calculated how many additional properties would be affected by it?
If what?
Did the Conservation Commission determine how many additional properties?
No, they did not. I just gave them the number of homes. So they have not done that.
I mean,
Judy said that certain intermittent streams would be called, certain swales would be intermittent streams and other ones would not be, but she didn't say which ones those are. And I think it's really good branding to call them intermittent streams, because like I said before, you picture somebody in Orvis outfit fly casting and streams have this wonderful thing, whereas these are just drainage ditches that in most more urban communities are in concrete culverts under the curb with catch basins, but they're still doing the same thing. The runoff from a road has to go somewhere. So in urban communities, it goes into catch basins, but we're not protecting the water in the catch basins. But for some reason, we have to protect it in the wetlands, in the swales that we have in this very rural community that doesn't have a lot, that has a lot of roads without catch basins, without culverts. So it's all what the branding of them as streams makes it's like, how can you be against streams? Well, they're not streams in my, but it's just my opinion.
So I don't know how, maybe isn't the right time or place to pick us. Oh, I mean, some of them, I personally see that, they are unique small ecosystems, and there's wetlands habitat. But those should be, in my mind, those should be identified. We should know which ones we're talking about. And so that kind of troubles me. And another thing is the estimation of, or the non-estimation of the additional use of town conservation commission resources, specifically the ability of our conservation agent or the Concom to keep up with the additional workload. I think there's going to be at least dozens of new filings every year required. And I'm not sure that they'll all be justified. Sometimes it will just be an impediment. All somebody wants to do is, plant a tree or move their mailbox. And because there is a swale nearby, they'll have to go to the Concom. And if that's the case, we should at least be identifying what those swales are beforehand, because we should be imposing on people to go to the Concom to make changes in a place where in the end the Concom just shrugs its shoulders and says that's fine. I don't know if there's anything more to say.
Well, many of these ditches are already regulated under state laws, so and that's why I think it would be useful if the Conservation Commission could give us a number of other additional properties are impacted.
Yeah.
So should the FinCom booklet include a recommendation from this board on the bylaw? As you know, the FinCom's not taking recommendations on non-financial articles.
We did vote on
Okay,
it, right?
and I believe it was 2-1 in favor. Right, so I just didn't know with the updated version that we got on Thursday, if there was any change to that.
I think the town should have an opportunity to see it and to vote on it.
Yeah, not to whether it's on the warrant or not, whether, yeah, because it's definitely, it's already on the warrant. So, I guess,
I don't remember that vote, but I'll believe that we did it.
That was just a vote on in or out.
Yeah, I thought that was a vote, I thought that was a vote on whether or not it was going to be on the warrant or not. That's what I recall, but I could be wrong.
I don't
I
recall.
believe it was in favor. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, I think it was just not whether or not to keep it on, it was to recommend.
Okay.
Select board.
that's the indication that, yeah, I'd like to, I think I'd like to reconsider that.
Yeah, I do have it in my
Okay.
summary as a recommendation
As
to,
which way?
as a recommendation.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, so I think motion that we reconsider that recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why are you considering it more information, or-
Well, I guess I've given it more thought, and, you know, I think there's gonna be a huge additional load on the Concom, on the conservation agent, and you know, the area that's being regulated is expanded, and it's not even being well defined what's, you know, what is regulated, I mean, who's regulated? And I feel that there ought to be more definition. So.
One thing, I'm not sure where this falls in our stormwater permit, but I do know from my time up in Maine where we were a few years ahead on the cycle, just because of when that town happened to get its MS4 permit. There is a point in our stormwater permit where one of the requirements is to map all of the swales in town and to have GIS mapping of that. And that's not to say it couldn't happen before it's required, but there will come a time that that's required as part of our federal permit. And then a follow-on to that is you actually have to do testing of your, we already have to do water quality testing of the outfalls from our stormwater system, but you have to do dry weather testing of drainage in the swales to see, because the whole point of the stormwater is to work backwards from, you know, when the pollutants are found to trace them back to their source, basically. So I don't know where that falls in our MS4 permit, but whether that's in like 1 to 2 or 3 years, or whether that's 4 or 5 or 6 years, I'm not sure, but that time is coming that all of this is going to have to be mapped and tested. So just FYI.
Meaning that might be some of the additional information.
Well, it might be something we're going to have to do anyway, sooner or later. And if that's going to be helpful to the community on, you know, helping to understand what the scope of impact of this bylaw might be, there might be a way to try to get that done sooner, whether with MVPC, local technical assistance or something, to get the swales mapped. Now, to what Wendy said, just whether they're mapped or not mapped, maybe it doesn't expand the applicability. Maybe some, or if not most of those, are already regulated, but it seems like there's clearly a lot of, you know, there's not like doesn't seem to be a clear answer to that. There seems to be difference of opinion on that.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, mapping is one thing, but you still have to delineate to see that it is wetland soils and everything else.
Okay, so you're saying even if it's a swale, it's not necessarily regulated?
Right.
Okay.
But I mean, clearly the townwide mapping would be useful.
Yeah.
for the stormwater.
so I mean, this, you know, this is way late, but I think I recall earlier in the discussion of this bylaw that there was reference, I think it was Oxford, where they defined the drainages that were affected, that fell within under the local bylaw. And it seems to me that that's a reasonable way to start. I mean, right now, I mean, there are people who, you know, not everybody in town, but many people in town are gonna have to, for the simplest thing on their own property, the way I read this, they'll be obligated to go to the Conservation Commission to do it. And even whether or not the bylaw is actually ultimately applicable to them. And
Yeah, that's not any different than the way it is now.
but now it's extended.
But it's not, this whereas originally they had 200 feet and then they brought it back to 100, which is the state regulation. So if the swale has wetland soils in it and it's delineated as a wetland, then it falls under state regs. And the bylaw is consistent with state regs in that regard. So they did back off. It seems like that's the primary issue, or are there
Yeah.
other issues?
Well, I mean, so do you think then that the way I've read this up to this point is that it was going to lead to considerably more demand on the Concom and on the conservation agent, and you know, and I'm not saying that that's long-term a reason not to do something, but if we don't have the resource to do it, you know, if we have barely enough resource to keep up right now, how do we add more without being honest about that up front and figuring out how we're gonna actually do the job?
Yeah, that's one of the questions on the warrant article request, right? It's the financial impact. Right?
Right, and that alone, to my way of thinking, we glossed over that, but the warrant articles are supposed to give an estimate of the financial impact on the town, and they just said there would be increased use of the Conservation Commission, but they had no way to know how much that would be, which was an inadequate response to my thinking. There's no question that nobody now, if they were, I took a picture of a house on Middle Street, and very mature lot, and you know, it's not like the house had just gone up recently, and beautiful landscaping. So they had everything. They had a swale. Their lawn mowed right up to it. They had a mailbox. They had a driveway. So this person would have to do any activities on it to put salt. I just asked Judy about putting salt on your driveway, and she said that would not be allowed. So this particular homeowner, and I'm not going to say who it was, and I'm not going to show anybody the picture, but it's a perfect example of this person's going to have to change their whole way of doing everything in their front yard. They can't tend their flower beds right there, because all of those are near the swale. So and now, having just asked the question, people across the street would have to get permission to do something in their yard, because that also is within the 100-foot buffer, even though there's a 40-foot road that's an impediment to all water coming through, just because of the way the bylaw is written. It's unbelievable that something across the street is gonna climb up out of one swale, go over the road, and then go back down another swale. That's water doesn't do that. So but I just got the answer to one of my questions about that. So that's how uncompromising and nonsensical this is. That someone across the street from a swale would have to, even though there's like two gullies between them, would have to get permission to have trim their boxwood or whatever. I didn't even consider the across the street until a couple days ago, and that's why I had to go over there and ask them about that.
Yeah, there's been several fires when I was on the commission, when that happened, and typically, there's not that many conditions put in the order of conditions for that very reason, that there's a river between.
But it's still a massive inconvenience to somebody that isn't going to improve the quality of anything.
But I mean, again, that currently exists, that's in state regulations. You may not like it, but that's what the Conservation Commission has to.
It's all dependent on whether you classify that as an intermittent stream. That's the key thing. Everything isn't an intermittent stream. Water goes down the lowest point. We have a lot of clay in West Newbury soils, so it doesn't get absorbed fast. So it travels down the lowest point, but that does not, and then when the sun comes out, it dries out. It doesn't make it a wetland or a stream.
The soils is what determines whether it's a wetland, the soils and the vegetation. It's not just the water.
Right, but someone's gotta do that. I don't wanna bore people with any more.
Yeah, okay, well, I would like to reconsider the vote, and, I make a motion to retake the vote in support of, or not, of the article.
You voted to reconsider.
I voted to reconsider, but we haven't voted, so, yeah, I would vote not to support it at this point.
It's hard to, so I'm voting.
You
Vote
you
no.
can,
Do I vote aye?
motions cannot be made.
The motion is to not support it.
You can't make a negative motion.
So-
So the motion is to
Clerk, clerk,
support, the motion is to support the article.
Okay, well, I vote opposed.
Yeah, and I'll vote
Is there a second?
next. Okay, second, yeah.
The second, okay.
And then you voted no.
I vote in favor.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would point out that the bylaw as written would have a date of effect of January 1st. So, if it doesn't get done, if something got done in the fall, it wouldn't even necessarily have any difference. So if there's some changes that could be made that would, build consensus around it.
But even then, it has to go to the attorney general.
Yeah, no, I know that. Yeah, so the date of effect, but yeah, you're right. So there would be a difference, but
And
it
sometimes that
could,
can take a while.
yeah, up to 90 days or
Plus the 30 days.
plus, yeah, that's right. So.
Would it be appropriate for us to ask the commission to estimate the financial impact in town for town meetings so that people know?
I think that'd be good.
Is that an appropriate thing to ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think I heard you ask that, I don't know you specifically, but I think I heard that question asked. I don't know if that was at this board or at the finance committee. But do you remember, I think there was, I think the agent and the chair were sitting back there and.
I think I asked.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that question was asked and it was said that, well, we really, I can't.
I don't know how they could do that.
I guess, what you all know and what I know is that the agent's hours are being pushed above budgeted hours already on a regular basis. So that's something that I think is, and if your cup is over full, one drop will make it
Stings the water.
Yeah, right, yeah, so, but that's something that I think is, I think that's part of the concern that I'm hearing.
Well, it's gonna be asked at town meeting. I'm sure.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
that should be considered.
Okay. We can move on. So we're gonna take item L out of discussion, out of order. For a discussion of West Newbury investment policy statement and potential to incorporate guidelines and or requirements regarding investment possibilities. So, Angus, I saw you reached out to listserv that you're on and didn't get anything that from any, you got 2 replies that look like there were no communities that were currently doing that had it, had applied that strategy or change strategy. RJ, if you reach out to Angus, wondering where the idea came from, it was something that I thought we had talked about. And because I know there's consideration for, looking at a new management for the funds, for the town's funds. I just thought it already talked about before. Went after that, and maybe it's
Mike, okay, I would say that the fiduciary responsibility of any pension system is to provide the maximum return for the money invested, because it's ultimately the for the pension holders, and it's for their benefit, and the future, again, the responsibility is to regardless of what the investment medium is, if it's a legal business and it's it's a business that's, it fits in with the risk tolerance of the particular investment vehicle, then I don't think anything should be excluded. I mean, people might, for a lot of reasons, because you don't know where this ends. I mean, personally, I don't. I always tell my investment person, I don't want to invest in Altria. I don't want to invest in tobacco products. It's just I don't believe it. It bothers me. I don't care if they get 8%. He keeps buying it anyway. I have to keep telling him, no, I told you not to do that. But in other words, there's somebody that could dislike almost any business. Someone could say, well, I don't want you to invest in McDonald's. I don't, want kids eating fast food. Or it can go on and on. Or I don't like the way some other company overprices whatever. It's just that anyone can have any kind of objection, a moral objection or whatever objection to almost an infinite number of kinds of investments. And I think it's a very slippery slope, and I don't think, for that reason alone, I don't think it should be done, because once you do one, people are gonna say, well, I don't believe in, the use of, I don't believe in eating chickens or whatever it is. And so it can just keep snowballing and limit the investment manager's ability to maximize the returns. And the whole point of the thing is to maximize the returns for the retirees, so that we don't, so that the taxpayers don't have to put so much money in.
okay. So, I mean, I understand, we're a small fish, but it seems to me that, we should consider both near term and long term. and clearly I really want to do this for discussion. I'm not going to push for West Newbury has to do this, but the idea is that if there's enough aggregation of invested funds that no longer are willing to participate in fossil fuels, that it will tend to make them even less competitive and make, in an effort to expedite the shift to non-greenhouse gas producing energy sources. And I mean, that's the basic goal. Is to
No, I know,
expedite
but what about my point? I don't think it's a good idea that we invest in tobacco products. say.
Well, yeah, but one is existential and the other one is, one is existential for humanity, the other one is, so if somebody chooses to smoke or not, then that's their impact, but if.
But I just picked that as in, you could be against a lot of different things.
Yeah. I guess I see it as sort of a predation risk or threat.
When I just, if I can jump in, I would say that whatever action the board takes tonight, I think the furthest, if you do anything, would be to refer it for further study. I think the investment, which I think is what you had in mind.
Right.
Part of this arose from, I was briefing Rick on the direction of the IPC to initiate a bid process, but also, shared with him some of the critiques that were made at a recent meeting regarding the lack of, and I know Lark could use more articulate words, but lack of, I guess, missing a moment in the market, missing an opportunity for returns due in part to the increase in value of fossil fuels, right? And so it was kind of like, in my mind, it was kind of like when worlds collide, right? I mean, you have like one committee of the town kind of saying, you should have invested more sooner, when I know very well, the direction, the broader policy direction of this town seems to be toward sustainability, green community, and so forth. So that was part of where, it's kind of like, isn't that curious? And so we got talking and it seemed like a good thing to put on for discussion, just to kind of get a sense of where this board stands. But I think, if anything, it would be referred to study. We put out a couple of feelers on listservs to see what we could get in the matter of a week or two, but it's not something that me or the treasurer have dug into in any depth whatsoever.
Right. Mark, you.
Yeah, if I can make just a couple comments. One is that ESG is a general, category, environmental, social, and governance, or what that stands for. And there's a lot of data that suggests that ESG investing actually does outperform over the long term. And the reason for that is that companies that are, if you measure investment performance over a long period of time, like 10 years, which is very, very relevant to the OPEB, right? Which is a perpetuity. So it's not incompatible with your thesis statement, which is that if you're going to be a good fiduciary, and by the way, there are plenty of fiduciaries who buy ESG portfolios, plenty of them. BlackRock has divested from oil and gas stocks. That's one of the biggest money managers in the world. And so there's plenty of precedent for money managers to adopt ESG portfolio management. And I think it ought to be, it's going to be something that we talk about at the IPC, because it's not just sort of fashionable, it's actually getting better returns. However, in the short term, to Angus's point, the OPEB portfolio in particular was not invested very aggressively in oil stocks just prior to this big run-up. And so in the short term, we didn't do as well as we would have if we'd had a more balanced portfolio with more energy. I was just reading a JP Morgan report, and it goes to your example, Dave, which is that over the past, I think it's about the past 20 years, tobacco stocks have outperformed the S&P 500 by almost 500 basis points. Like, they made 13% compound annual returns when the S&P made 8.5 or something like that. And this is a situation where everybody understands that tobacco stocks are not, the business model is not one which is very attractive. And it's also, possible to get great returns, or much better returns. So I want to make one other comment. I think this is a policy matter for the town. I don't think it's an IPC level decision. I think it's a question of, does the town want to take a stand on this, and take a sort of a position and say, we want to do it this way. Like David, Annie and I have told our investment advisor, no oil stocks. You don't want tobacco stocks. We don't want oil stocks. And we've been fine with missing out on a few percentage points of return over the sort of feeling good about the existential issue.
The irony is too, that, there also are times where oil stocks do terrible.
They did terrible.
Yeah,
That's right.
right. Yeah.
That's why the longer term, it's ESG measurement stuff. If I was going to make a suggestion to the IPC to try to come back to you with a recommendation, I would suggest that we look at these ESG managers and their relative returns against the benchmarks, because I think you could get comfortable acting as a fiduciary that there are longer term positive investment differentials associated with basically ESG is about good management. And good is a value word. Who's good, one person's good is not another person's good. But long-term returns on equity are higher for these ESG portfolios. And it's something to think about. Generally speaking, they're not in oil and gas stocks. And they're also not in gun manufacturers and tobacco companies. All of that is a value judgment. But I don't think there's anything wrong, particularly from a fiduciary or fiduciarily managing money as a fiduciary. There's nothing wrong, I don't think, with taking a position that you want to do that, because it's not supported by the numbers. It's not like fiduciaries who made ESG just bought into ESG portfolios lost money compared to managers who didn't, the fiduciaries who didn't. It's the opposite. And so, at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that's actually an argument to move forward. So you might actually have sort of the best of both worlds, with higher returns and also sort of answering this question.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are other, you mentioned BlackRock. The city of Boston is pursuing.
Yeah.
They're the way I've seen it references divestment of oil and gas or fossil fuels. Yeah. But it may actually be a broader ESG portfolio. CalPERS, California Pension Fund has divested of oil and gas. Yeah. New York City is. Now, obviously, we're tiny, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't also see a benefit, or couldn't also see a benefit. And also, it is a statement on where you're going.
Yeah, I just think that the argument for not making the fiduciary, you're not meeting your fiduciary responsibility, is undercut by the data. If you're not going to, over a long period of time. Having said that, if you look at the growth of the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrial Average over the last 50 or 75 years, oil and gas and tobacco companies were very, very substantive contributors to the creation of a lot of wealth and a lot of appreciation in portfolios over a long period of time. But I think the long-term outlook favors, and this OPEB portfolio is as long a term as there can be for the town. It favors the CSG approach. At least that's what the data says.
I'm just concerned about if we do one, a town is a collection of a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas. And that, like I said, will we be limiting ourselves to, will we keep getting, I think, you did that, I think you should eliminate, like I said, I don't know, chicken farming, or whatever it is, on and on. I just don't want to see that happen.
I think the ESG approach is broader and than just picking off petroleum and, gas and fossil fuel companies. It's actually an investment philosophy which would allow you to have an awful lot of other things, probably some of which are well-managed companies that are adjacent to that industry, suppliers or engineering services companies and other things like that. But I get your point, David. I think if somebody says, I don't like chicken, so I don't want KFC in the portfolio because it's you can go down a rabbit hole. So I understand that.
So that's why if you frame it that we're going to invest in ESG funds or portfolios versus we're going to divest.
That's right.
I think
That's
that's
right.
a better way.
That's the way I'm thinking about it. And I also really think it's important not to confuse fiduciary responsibility with this ESG strategy, or sort of, being a bad fiduciary by doing it, because the data just doesn't support it. You actually do well.
It seems to me, just I don't know how to, I hadn't thought of it, but the TIA CREF portfolio, and they had a social investing newer fund, and it did underperform the basic CREF fund.
Yeah, I think you can find specific examples where people have done that. And I'm sure, if you sort of look at individual funds, you can find different levels of performance. This JP Morgan report that I read is I think it's talking about the category.
Okay.
I'll see if I can get this to you guys soon.
Can you email that? Yeah.
It's a tricky question because I also think, it is important. The fiduciary responsibility doesn't actually lie with the IPC, right? It lies with the treasurer. The IPC is making advice, trying to find a manager that's going to do a good job. And we have done a good job. Cambridge has done a nice job for the town, actually beaten the S&P 500 up until recently. And as the more professional money managers, folks, Gene Trim and Chris Wild, who are actually, that's what they do for a living. I think it was Gene who said in the last meeting, this kind of market is where the manager earns their fee, because the market's choppy and it's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel to do well in the last market cycle. Although these guys did better than the market, which is nice, mostly because they were having tech stocks. But it was Chris Wild, to your point, who said, I don't know, maybe 2 IPC meetings ago, we're really light, we're really heavy in techs, and we're not so heavy in oil, in the energy sector and some other more inflation resistant sectors. And of course, when inflation started to tick up, the tech stocks all came down. We weren't exposed in these other sectors, which did well. So our performance near term from Cambridge has not been as great as it was, last while. And that's not actually why we're looking for a new manager. We were talking about doing kind of a dog and pony show with a bunch of different managers over the last years.
At least, yeah, even longer than that,
It's
yeah.
not, it's not, it's just, we felt that it's just,
do that.
it had been 5 or so years, we just
Yeah.
thought it was worth doing at this point. Not with the intention, maybe we'll just keep it.
Right. Yeah, so I think one question might be in designing the RFQ, and it is an RFQ, not an RFP, because it's actually exempt from procurement, so it would be a qualifications-based selection. And we do have a draft RFQ that Caitlin had put together, and I don't know if she'd shipped that over to Chris or not. But there's a draft that she got from her network that other communities have used. So I guess a question would be, as you know, with an RFQ or an RFP, you can have kind of minimum required as well as comparative, qualitative evaluation criteria. So I guess a question could be in the procurement of, do you put in anything in your procurement document that favors or at least invites respondents to say whether they have, would recommend an ESG portfolio. I'd obviously work with Lark and the committee on the verbiage, but, do you basically give that indication in the procurement that you're looking for a certain type of money manager, or do you wait and do that within the interview process based on who responds? because the reason I put the investment policy statement in the packet is that is, like Lark said, it is, the end of the day, it's the treasurer, but it's that statement that guides that. And it's the investment policy committee, which, objectively knows more than anyone on staff regarding the details of this stuff. So,
There's another angle to this, which is that we have this actuarial, service that comes in and looks at the projected returns on the portfolio relative to the projected liabilities. And it is that exercise which gives rise to the balance sheet item, which is our pension surplus or pension deficit. And for years and years and years, West Newbury was the only town in the Commonwealth with a positive, with an OPEB credit, essentially. We were ahead of the game. So in thinking about this ESG thing, you got to take into account the return expectations associated with that choice and whether or not it would have an impact on the way the actuary looks at it and whether that would have an impact on the balance sheet and whether we care about that. To string together an awful lot of conditional statements. But that's a thing that works. That logic is all connected. Because ultimately there's going to be a line item on the balance sheet that says OPEB, asset or OPEB liability. And that has an impact on the bond rating. Some credit analysts will look at that and say,
So the actuarial analysis is the new person, the new company that's been doing this is more, what would you say, Mark? Stringent or whatever. But they complained, well, not complained, but they said we were not, we didn't have enough. They wanted us to be more 70% equities versus 60% equities, and they downgraded us because we were being more conservative, which is kind of unusual.
yeah, I remember that. And we've actually talked about whether or not we ought to change that asset mix, which now that the market's gotten sort of choppy, makes more sense. But that's for another day.
That's a different issue.
Yeah. Okay.
So where in this policy statement would you see these guidelines going? I mean, I was trying to look for where it would be.
Yeah, it might not be appropriate in there. It was, it's the only policy we have on the investments. So it might be something that would be more direction from the treasurer with the advice of the investment policy committee. I agree with what Lark said earlier. It really is a bigger discussion, which is why it's before this board as to whether you want to look at that in a serious way. I think if you do, and it sounds like there's plenty to look at, I think it'd be good to, to have the investment policy committee look at that at their,
There's plenty of precedent.
Yeah.
I mean, it might not be that any towns in the Commonwealth are doing this, but there's plenty of fiduciaries.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most of my investments are in ESG.
Yeah. But I mean, CalPERS is one of the biggest pension fund managers in the world.
Right.
And if they're taking a stand, they are a fiduciary for, thousands and thousands of, retired unionized teachers.
Right.
So, and then to your question, Wendy, it could manifest itself in the, question or a couple of questions in the RFQ, and then part of the selection process to either retain the same manager or select a new manager. But if they were given direction as to, these objectives beyond just the return, I think that's presumably a decision at the end of the day this board would make, or would, direct the treasurer that that's an objective that you'd like to see addressed.
Okay. So
I mean, yeah, technically it is at the end of the day, it's the treasurer's sole authority under statute. But
and if I could just say this about that, I believe that there's a diversity of opinion about this on the IPC. I mean, I'm not here as an IPC member, but I think if we were in an IPC meeting, we'd hear a diversity of opinion about this question from the others that are involved in it. Not David, we know his feelings, but I think Gene and Chris would also, they have interesting ideas about this, and they're knowledgeable about it.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I would like this to be given more personally, I'd like this to be given more thought and, referencing it initially as, divestment from fossil fuels. Is probably clumsy and overly simplified, but I think it would be good for us to explore our options and to understand whether or not changing focus and direction of SB investments would make sense to the town. Both being financially or fiduciarily responsible, but also, meeting other longer term goals that the town has or might have.
The IPC would be happy to do the work. I think it's something we can dig into and come back to the treasurer with some, and to you guys with, some information to continue the discussion.
What do you think about that?
Excuse me?
What do you think about that?
Well, I'd like to see what the. Again, I just don't want us to go down the road of, like I said, we don't invest in a company that does, whatever. There's an infinite number of things that people don't like. There are. There's somebody that doesn't like, you can say, okay, we don't want someone investing in precious metals because the smelting does something. Or you can just go on and on, or blood diamonds, or it's just the number of things that you could be. I don't want to invest in shipping because the ships leak their bilge water out into the ocean. I mean, there's a million things you could be against, and I just hope that we don't wake a sleeping giant in that and have to keep addressing. Okay, we want to do away with this. That's all. That's my reasoning. I think long term, as an investment, that fossil fuels probably aren't going to be a great investment, but that doesn't mean they might not be for the next 5 years or whatever. That's the way it is. I'm just with this. I'm just looking at it as in a completely cold manner that we have to make as much money as we can for the retirees.
So it sounds like there's, but we definitely support
But doesn't
to
mean we can't find out.
look at it further. So, and since this is an active, work item with the IPC anyway, that's part of why, it came up in the conversation with Rick is prior to going through the whole, the procurement process, it kind of makes sense if there is going to be a shift in objectives for the portfolio, which is a big if, but if there is, it seems like it might be good to think that through prior to potentially shifting managers and then shifting the direction they're given. So.
Okay.
So I can send something out to the committee. I didn't want to send something out just until I had a sense of where the majority sat.
Okay. I don't know if we have anything definitive to vote on at this point.
No, I think I'm clear on the direction.
Thanks.
Thanks, Luck.
Good to see you guys. Thank you for all the work you do. I'm listening to this and watching it, and I really appreciate it. As a citizen, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, all you guys. Yeah. No, take it to the next time.
Okay.
Okay. Discussion potential proposal for future town meeting to amend zoning applicable to the site of the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Building.
All right, so I'd sent out a supplemental memo over the weekend. Did you guys all get that? That's where I was suggesting referring this for analysis to the planning board. seemed to be a way to advance the ball, somewhat quicker than, plus if they're supportive or not supportive, that sure would be a useful input to this board to determine how you want to go forward.
So what did we ultimately get as strategy from the? Now I've forgotten from the.
Consultant?
Correct, yeah.
Honestly, I think it validated what we thought we knew, which was that the repurpose or, restoration of the building by an outside party is going to be, it's a big cost for someone to take on, and to do that for what's allowed in the underlying zoning is
Correct,
probably,
but could they give us any advice or strategy in how to develop what kind of, if it comes to a zoning change, what kind of zoning change to actually even make?
not so much the zoning. I mean,
They
there's.
actually dealt with that.
No, they wouldn't be doing the zoning, they'd be doing the historic preservation restriction.
Okay.
I think the
Oh,
zoning
right, okay.
is really, both Lee and I have both done a lot of zoning. I mean, I think we're talking about, screening, light shielding, landscaping, there's kind of some typical things that you would include anytime you're introducing, commercial or mixed use in close proximity to residential. There's kind of certain things to do with adjacencies and screening and lighting and so forth that you would definitely address. Many of which are probably pretty well addressed in our current zoning, but I think, you'd want to really look at that closely. But one of the questions I've had is would this be, I've assumed that the board's thought would be to include this parcel within an existing zoning district rather than creating some standalone zoning district that applies to a 10,000 square foot parcel. The latter does not, to me, seem logical. So I think what you're talking about, I think, is potentially introducing a proposal to rezone the parcel as commercial, which does allow commercial uses. It allows mixed use. So that wouldn't entail any additional protections beyond what's in the commercial zoning district anyway, other than what could be imposed through procurement or, disposition or a historic preservation restriction.
I thought we were talking about limiting the uses though, we said it had to be 2 uses, so office space and residential.
Well, that's, I mean, we haven't gotten to that. I mean, I think to do that would be to create a separate zoning district, which to me feels like a bit extreme, for your contrived is a great word. It's less than a 10,000 square foot parcel in a town this size to have its own zoning district kind of seems a little unusual.
A lot of things could fall in the commercial category.
That's true. Yeah.
And so then there would have to be somehow a restriction put on the structure itself.
I mean, remember, it was a building where alcohol was served routinely. Well, we're forgetting that.
So I guess we should wait till after town meeting.
Well, I think that's, we put it on because we know there's going to be questions at town meeting. And so I wanted to, have the board have a chance to at least chew on it a little bit more. I don't know if we put it on again for the May 9th meeting, but, questions will be asked that haven't really been thought through.
I don't feel, someone asked me a question about the zoning, I don't feel comfortable answering anything. I don't know.
Mhm.
So you're proposing having the planning board respond prior to town?
No, not prior to town meeting. No, it would take, just to set in motion some kind of process where some of the legal questions or just questions of, like I said in the memo, whether there would clearly, in my opinion, be a defensible public interest rationale, with the objective of helping basically channel private investment to restore a historic property. That to me seems like you could articulate. Is that public benefit sufficient to outweigh any concerns there may be about, or about the idea of spot zoning? Because it's only spot zoning if it's arbitrary and kind of treating like in a different way. If this is objectively a different parcel, which I think there's reasons to suggest it is, I think there's, anyone can sue anyone for anything, but I think there's a way to do it that wouldn't, in my opinion, be spot zoning. But I think part of that analysis would have to do with, is there a legitimate public interest objective or a public policy objective advanced by rezoning it?
So Angus, so you say, okay, this is I have to picture it in my mind. If this is the downtown business district, and then down the street is the car post. How is calling it part of the business district really any different than spot zoning? Are we gonna make all the residential properties intervening part of that zone too? I mean, I just need a little help here.
I don't know if there's anything that requires a zoning district to be contiguous.
There isn't?
I don't think so.
No, there's not. No, and spot zoning is something that's not, it's not defined in statute. It's something that's been defined over many years by case law. And in some cases,
What's the
zoning.
inherent evils of spot zoning?
It's been a while since I've read those cases, but it kind of comes down to treating something in a different manner that is objectively kind of consistent. It's conferring either rights or restrictions on land that is objectively indistinguishable from surrounding land. Zoning is supposed to kind of apply similarly to similar type
So in a way, this is
properties.
pretty obvious in that it happens to have a building that was of a unique architectural.
But a building's not permanent, and a building's not permanent, and land is. So the zoning applies to the land, not the building. So that's one of the.
But it was never a residential property.
And I think would be, in my opinion, part of the analysis is not just that property, but maybe others in that area as to what their historic uses have been, because I think there is, like, let me just pull up the zoning map, because it's going to show it's all zoned, uniformly, but in fact, there's different uses. Like if you did a land use map of this area, it would be more complex than the zoning map.
I bet there was 120 square foot shoe shop there at one point.
I think it's at the very top.
Okay.
Across the street.
Why am I not-
It's got all over the back.
Oh, I know. It's the base map that I'm, no, it's not. Zoning. Oh, here. Okay, so. So what you see is, a very large surrounding area zoned residential, and then with this commercial. But I think if you looked at the actual land uses, kind of in this intervening, I think you would see, oh wait, that's not what I wanted. More variety in terms of the actual land uses. Sorry, this is tough. So for instance, this I think is, oh no, that's commercially zoned.
Building, is that commercial?
Which one's that?
It's on the other side of the street.
Oh, do you see, can you see the parcel number?
It might be
Across the street, the Jarvises used to have their real estate office. Yeah, a little bit down, but yeah.
Well, I mean, you take this little building right across the street from here, that's hard to, with a glass storefront, that would be kind of hard to envision as a housing unit as it's currently constructed. So yeah, I guess the question is, do you want to refer something to study, or do you want to yourself study it further before you take that step? But where the draft, or now I guess final warrant does refer to, the anticipation of a future proposed zoning amendment, that's obviously going to invite questions as to whether that, or what that would look like, what that might look like.
I don't see why we don't move forward on that.
So hopefully you're gonna respond to those questions at town meeting. Is none of us-
To the extent that we can, we don't know. I think we can talk about what kind of consideration the board would make, what factors that you'd look at in determining whether you want to propose an amendment or not. Obviously, that would, I assume, be predicated on the passage of that article. I think you'd look to that majority support where it's explicit that would be in anticipation of a future proposed zoning amendment. But I think, being ready to speak to what types of considerations that you'd look at and determining whether you think a zoning amendment does make sense. But no one's going to be able to say what a zoning amendment might look like specifically.
So you said if we were to refer,
We'll pass that question over to you.
Right. Yeah.
So, you might wait till after town meeting.
yeah, I mean, it seemed premature to me, so it seems premature to refer it to the planning board at this point. Because
Okay.
I guess we don't want them to spin their wheels on something that in the end there's nothing to.
Okay, all right.
But if it's approved, then, if that's the option that.
It's only a few weeks, so
Right.
that's a good
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything more on this topic?
I don't think so. Okay, then the update regarding the consideration of potential municipal vulnerability preparedness action grant proposal, so that it was in the packet, and so we concluded that there was too much there in terms of what what was being considered was too extensive, and we didn't have the town resources to support really any aspects of it at this point. And instead, the resiliency committee will work to, over the course of the summer, so that by August, their material that helps to decide an amount that could go to a special town meeting in the fall to pursue an analysis of the risk to River Road specifically from climate change. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
So that would be outside the MVP process.
No, that would be within the MVP process. Instead of applying this year, we would apply next year. So once again, we're kicking the can down the road another year. Not because we want to kick the can down the road, but because the process is not it's a fairly complicated application process. The state doesn't make it easy. This program is not It's, perhaps for better, perhaps for worse, but it's not an easy application. You need to do quite a bit of upfront work.
So you mentioned fall town meeting?
Because what we would do would be to get to the point where we knew what we could estimate what we would need for matching funds, what would be needed by the town for matching funds to apply for these. I mean, the dilemma is this year, part of what caused us to just, say this is impossible was that there was an effort to sort of aggregate various in-kind contributions to comprise a matching grant or a matching funds for the grant, matching value to the grant, and it just got too complicated. And too many things were playing against each other, and it just wasn't making sense, and it was going to be really difficult to. It would require a tremendous amount of administrative work to make it work. Because because there were three distinct different areas of what had been proposed for grant. So and any one of them might have been supported or might not have been supported and awarded by the program. And if you had aggregated everything and you're depending upon these in-kind funds helping to justify the grant over here, the grant fund, these in-kind town contribution or contribution from somebody just helping to justify the state money over here. But this side fell through, the state didn't award that, then you would lose your match over here. So just having at least for the majority of it, having it clear and simple and a simple, cash match. It makes it a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
And the other thing is hopefully we will have resources in the form of affiliates on DPW staff next year who can help with that.
So how did the committee as a whole feel about the second format?
Well, there were one or two people who had a tremendous amount of effort invested, and then everybody else was looking at it thinking this is really complicated and having trouble wrapping their head about it. So there was some disappointment, but I think if we pursue a simpler process, a simpler grant, that I think everybody's okay with it.
So when do we need to start on this grant application?
So I sent an email to Angus and Wayne, copied Liz Callahan, the chair of the committee, proposing, but we had talked at the last resiliency committee meeting about a particular date. It doesn't work, as it turns out, so we have to come up with another date. But once we have that meeting, then we'll have sort of a better idea of how to move forward. And the goal is for the committee to move forward over the summer. And there's already a lot of work that's gone into this. So probably well over 50% of the groundwork is already laid. Okay, so next we have to review the potential policy to waive 15-day waiting period for effective date of town manager personnel appointments.
So following on prior discussions the board has had, I took a crack at some language. So I put that out for your review, whether you like it as is or modified. So this was part of the supplemental that I sent out on Sunday. So it's marked item J. Sure.
It's on the packet online.
Okay, so this is the extra thing? Okay.
Yeah, and this was, there were four different items off this agenda. This was item, yeah.
Okay.
So does this lay the groundwork for future select board changes?
It does, but where it's in statute, I thought that was important to, that is what the statute says. So while this board as currently composed may feel this is a fine idea, I thought it was, important to make it, just to make it clear, it's only in effect until it's repealed or amended in the future.
I'd make a motion to approve the memo to the select board by Angus Jennings on the review of the potential policy of weighted, India weighted for effective date of time and your personal appointments.
Second.
What's the last word here? So, yeah. Okay, any discussion?
No.
All in favor? Aye.
And so I appreciate this. I think it's gonna administratively work a lot better.
It's gonna make things a lot easier.
I think there was some unintended consequences of that language that I don't think anyone anticipated or intended, but this would be a big help. Thank you.
Okay, next item is item K, consideration of referring potential amendments to personnel policy regarding sick and personal days rules for qualified part-time employees.
And Glenn in the past would say, I got a possible headache reading this.
Yeah.
5.839 2 hours and 5.839 1 hour.
Yeah, they really got to think through it. I did have one note that I made. I mean, I think it all makes sense. But there's a note here for personal leave for TPT, qualified part-time employees, that we need to be careful to avoid orphan fractions of the 4-hour increments. Because the way it's worded currently is there are 4-hour increments, but particularly, for, I think between 20 and 30 hours, but even for a greater amount than that.
No, you're right.
we
That's
really need to
right.
End up with orphan fractions.
Yeah,
of the
someone's-
4-hour segment.
Yeah.
Explain that.
If someone's got let's say they accrue, I don't know what, 13.6. And so they've used, and there'd be that 1.6 hour increment. So maybe something like 4-hour increments or the remainder.
Yeah, that might be
something like that.
Because, I mean, if you could always plan, then you could always make sure you did it, but sometimes you won't be able to plan. Or you might, say if you had a day, I think this would be particularly, say with somebody with 24-hour week, so it's 0.6 times 16 hours, so it's 9.6 hours. And, they might take one 4-hour increment, and then that would leave them with 5.6 hours, which would exceed their longest day, or could exceed their longest day.
Yep.
At which point, how do they deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of minimum increments, honestly, is probably the least important part of all this,
Yeah.
if that was struck.
Yeah.
I guess what I was trying to avoid is, I don't know. I always, historically, before I ever got to West Newbury, I've always thought of a personal day as a day.
Yeah.
And you take a day, and what goes on is that people might take 1.5 hours and 2 hours, and such small.
Does that happen?
That happens.
Okay.
Which is kind of like,
Taking a personal hour?
which to me isn't really what.
It's
I-
not like extra vacation time.
Right, I have always thought of it as a day, but I, so I had written an earlier
I
draft.
can get that, say if somebody they're applying for a loan or something.
Yeah.
They need to run over to Newburyport to the bank, and it has to be on a weekday, and,
Mhm.
you might just have to take, you don't want to take a whole day, might only need an hour
Right,
or an hour and a half.
but that could be vacation, it could be unpaid leave, it could be for an hourly worker, it could be they make up that hour at a different time. I mean, there's different options people have. So I think if there's a minimum increment or not, that's, like I said, the least important part of this. I had started with a draft a few weeks ago that was talking about whole day increments that, maybe was too draconian, but I don't know. To me, I just felt like maybe, I don't know. I don't know if that's a problem or not, but it just seemed like
No, I
if
think
someone's
it's-
taking an hour and a half or an hour, like it's, to me, there's a point at which it's kind of over exercising the benefit.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I wasn't trying to
Yeah.
really complicate it. What I was trying to do is avoid a situation at a later date where you now have somebody.
Yeah, no, that's a good catch, Rick. Yeah,
They're left with 2.4 hours and they can't use them.
right,
They don't, it's not a 4-hour increment.
right.
Now I see where you're driving.
The remainder.
Yeah, it was always,
But
it's just, it's like,
I would kind of hope that a supervisor would say, if you just gotta go over to the institution for savings of 45 minutes, just go,
Yeah.
instead of taking the time off.
Yeah. And I think in practice that does happen. So I think, the question is
Now I see.
not what you want to vote. The question is what you want to refer to hearing. So,
No, this thing is really complicated.
and that's part of why it's festered all these years, is because it is deceptively complicated.
And it's so minor, but it's.
That's why it's festered for years. So, and as you see, there's really the two different items, the personal leave and the sick leave. So let's stay focused on the personal leave and then go back to the sick, which is, I think, much more challenging in a lot of ways.
well, with, say, the addition that you said, or the remaining fraction, or, something like that.
Mhm.
I think this makes perfect sense.
So just for those watching from home, this would, increase the amount of personal leave across the board. So I think everybody, benefits, but it would resolve the ambiguity of whether a day is 8 hours across the board, which kind of results in a disproportional benefit the fewer hours you work.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess the first most basic change is that it is an increase of, from 1 personal day per year to 2 personal days per year for a full-time employee to 16 hours a year for a full-time employee. And then that would be prorated, based on qualified part-time, the number of hours that a qualified part-time employee worked. So in the end, and then it would, the time would be prorated as opposed to this currently confusing and somewhat ambiguous wording that some people think says that they get a full 8-hour day regardless of how many hours they work in a week. So now it'd be clear and unambiguous how many hours you got based on how many hours you got for personal day time or personal time. And how it's related to how many hours you worked per week.
So I do know, I've met with some employees who think this is a good idea. Everyone obviously wants to see exactly how it's written, and I've told everyone it would be referred to hearing, and I do think you get comments on it, but the response I've got to the idea is favorable. Everyone wants to see exactly how it's written and so forth, but the idea has seemed to.
Okay, so
Be
now
well
we have to
received.
set up a hearing, correct?
Correct, yep.
Okay. I'd make a motion to approve the
So refer to hearing.
changes to personnel policy, section 5.5 on personal leave to have a public hearing at what's the date of that will be
May 9th. Yeah, is the next meeting.
Second. All in favor?
Yeah, so would you leave the minimum increments of 4 hours? in there?
I would add some language, or the remainder or fraction. I'd come up with whatever language to capture that idea.
Okay. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Thank you. Now, on the sick leave, this one is, in my opinion, I mean, this is really tricky. I don't see any way to set this policy that is both fair and consistent and is not going to be seen as a take back of a prior benefit, frankly, because I think the way the benefit has either been communicated or just kind of allowed to stand by, non-attention is objectively unfair to full-time employees. So I just don't think there's a way to make it consistent that's not going to cause some unhappiness. So that's where the way I framed it in my memo to you is, do you read the policy as applying the prorated formula, or do you read it as conferring 10 full days a year or 80 hours a year? If you read it as applying the prorated formula, do you see a need to revise the language in the personnel policy to make this more explicit? And if so, I think that would need to be referred to hearing. Or if you feel that the way it's written sufficiently communicates that, then I think a question would be the date of effect. But, I do know that, some, especially long tenured employees, have definitely expressed that they were told specifically that they got 10 days, 80 hours. So, there's definitely, I think it's worth clarifying the policy. But that is going to raise the question of when that takes effect, because even though I sent the memo out last June, there's some number of employees that are insisting that they're continuing to accrue 80 hours of sick leave a year, even if their work schedule is so.
Now I never could understand why this is misinterpreted. Now, if I read it, you can misinterpret.
You definitely can misinterpret it.
Yeah.
And part of it had to do with a template of a timesheet, which said in the footnote of a standard timesheet that I guess the finance directors of old, or some number of finance directors, someone was given to people at the time of hire, that said in the footnote that sick leave accrues at 0.833 days per month. It might have even said 6.64 hours or something. So it's, even though, whether that was intended as policy or not, there's documentation that people, have relied on to say that they accrue, whatever the multiplier, 6.64, whatever hours per month. The effect of that, just to use one example, is if you have a 20-hour week employee that's earning 80 hours a year, that's obviously a disproportional benefit, that four weeks of sick leave relative to a full-time employee who's making 2 weeks of sick leave. So that's always seemed really illogical. So we're just looking to clear this up and move forward.
So what would the language be in 5.241?
I think it would be, and I didn't have time to write up the actual language. I'd more try to convey the idea, but you have in the packet the language for the vacation, and that says very clearly, it talks about the prorating, or qualified part-time employees shall be entitled to vacation leave with pay on a prorated basis based on their regularly scheduled weekly hours. Even that, I think, isn't like beautifully written, but everyone understands it and everyone agrees with it with regard to vacation. So I think a starting point would be capture that same idea in the sick leave policy explicitly in favor of the current language, which refers to the 0.833 days per completed month. So if, so if that's enough to refer to hearing, I would draft something that captures that. Or if you want to have actual language in front of you, I could do that. I just didn't have time.
I think it's enough to put together for hearing.
Will employees have enough time to look at it?
Yeah, they all know it's coming, and one of the employees who's most following this issue knows what I'm going to be proposing, and is kind of even at peace with that, and even acknowledges that it is more fair, but just is adamant that until it's officially changed, the accrual rate's going to be.
Okay,
So-
that's some progress.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's nothing but fair. There is no, the way the interpretation that's been taken by is objectively unfair. So I don't really see how anyone
The ideal
could.
world would be where you had 2 20-hour per week job.
Right.
And you get 4 weeks leave, you end up with 8 weeks vacation.
Sick leave,
Yeah.
sick leave, but yeah, so it's,
Yeah, 4 weeks.
I think it's a function of, we had a lot of different finance directors and town accountants over the course of, many years, and there just any consistency that used to exist broke down. And then I can tell you from both current staff and former staff that people just would tear their hair out. They didn't have time to fight over this. Like, we got a lot of work to do. And every time the town accountant would try to reconcile accruals, they'd run into this, like with left, right, and center, and it would become political, and they just back off. But it's not, I just don't see
I
any
don't think I ever
objective.
read it. You have to get your mind about reading it the other way, and then
Yeah.
you can see, okay.
Yeah, no, I really get, especially, I mean, these examples I put in here, if you have someone working only 8-hour days and it says you get 10 days, like, I understand, like 10, that's 80 hours, but that's disproportionate. That is just, that's why I said at the beginning of this discussion, I don't think there's a way to write it that's both fair and consistent and going to.
Yeah,
make
but
it
for
work
that
out.
same person, on the other hand, if they, so if it's, for a full-time employee, they get 2 weeks worth of sick leave.
That's right.
As days. And if you work 4 8-hour days and you get now 8 days, that's still 2 weeks.
That's my
That's
point.
exactly
That's
right.
exactly how I look at it. Yes. And I think that's the only way that's going to be consistent to where everyone's accrual rate is consistent. That's, but that will be perceived as a take back by some number of people.
So is there anything?
But Angus, all you can say is, Angus, you can say, okay, we're not gonna claw back any of the extra days that you got in the past, or
Mhm.
that you banked in the past.
Mhm.
But going forward, it has to be fair.
That's-
They're already getting a benefit if they haven't used those days. They've been able to bank some of them.
That's correct.
So question 3 here is, if so, on what day would prorated rate of sick leave accrual begin taking effect? And so the 3 options, A, B, and C, were September 2018, which was the original select board or board of selectmen discussion back then, with Angus shortly at 3 months into your tenure or so.
2,
2 months into your tenure. Or June 2021, when you sent the memo,
right.
that is still disputed by some.
That's right.
Or now C, whatever future date personnel policy is formally amended.
That's right.
So the policy was just never amended? That's what happened?
Correct, because my understanding and working with staff back then was that the finance staff have always read it, that it was prorated. And when I, didn't take long after I was hired that I was made aware this was a dispute. And so that's why I brought the memo to the select board in the first meeting of September 2018 to say, this is how we are reading it. Do you agree? They voted, yes, we agree. So that's just kind of validated how everyone in the finance department had read it. But because the written policy never changed, and I didn't frankly look at it as a policy change, I looked at it as a clarification. And then in June, the June 2021 memo was the same, this is to clarify. But that is not how it's perceived.
Yeah.
And so I think the path of least resistance would be, item C. I will tell you, there are some number of full-time employees who will not be happy about that because they perceive, which mathematically is correct, that they're getting a disproportionately less sick leave because they're full-time relative to others who are
But
working less. But I think,
going
yeah, no, we got to
forward,
just put this to bed and
But didn't the accruals, since your memo, didn't it go into effect in your memo?
And that's why every quarter, when we try to reconcile, it blows up again and we have more
No,
gnashing of
So
teeth,
have they
yeah.
approved it or not? That's what I'm not clear on.
Well, everyone's tracking their own accruals and my office is tracking accruals. So the numbers don't reconcile.
So your office is tracking the accruals based on your memo.
Correct. Yeah.
so. I
But we
think
can,
have
it's an
to have
Excel database. We can make an adjustment. That's,
a drop dead SL day. And from then on, what happened in the past is the past, but
yeah. Yeah,
you just gotta pick the day.
I think that's right. Yeah. So,
So do we need to pick that day?
well, I mean, that would be part of the action at the hearing is, and it sounds kind of reading between the lines, it sounds like it would be that the date would be whatever the date the policy is formally amended. Maybe we even, I don't want to make too much complex math in terms of like where we accrue for the whole month on, typically we post the first day of the month. I don't want to get into that. I might want to pick like June 1st as the date, just so it's like a clean break, because we post every month.
Or if you pick the end of a payroll period, or whatever.
Yeah, but per month,
Okay.
yeah. So, but this is all working toward getting the accruals into the software, the payroll software, so that everybody will see on every time slip what their accruals are, which is how it's been in every organization I've worked for, from my first job working at Subway to, I'm trying to get vacation at Subway. But anyhow, like I've never worked for an organization where you didn't have on your timesheet or have on your pay stub what your balance was on vacation or sick or whatever until you get here.
Yeah.
So that's all we're trying to do. And then we won't have to accrue or reconcile every 3 months because everyone will have it, right?
Okay, let's make.
Yeah, all right, sorry.
Yeah, so I moved to, to refer to a public hearing, for consideration of the, sick time accrual rate.
Reiteration, it should be the reiteration. of
The re-clarification.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
A second. All right,
Thank you.
hopefully we don't see this again.
I do think this will resolve it. And I think people understand. Let's see. All right, we already talked about L, so now we're on to M. Yeah, so I brought forward a recommendation to basically disallow the scheduling of site visits on federal holidays and on Sundays of holiday weekends. So I've proposed for the board to consider a policy that no board, commission, or committee appointed by the select board shall schedule any work event at which staff attendance is required on any Sunday that is part of a 3-day holiday weekend, nor on any holiday recognized as such in the West Newbury personnel policies, nor on Easter Sunday. So it's on the table for discussion.
I don't think employees should be required, except in an emergency basis, to to have regular responsibilities on any Sunday, not just these Sundays. With the exception of the Board of Fire Engineers, which does have drills and stuff on the weekends occasionally.
So, what are the thoughts relative to Saturdays? Does anybody have any thoughts?
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I know there are times where things have to happen on a Saturday or a Sunday on a weekend. And I think currently that the Conservation Commission at least, and Judy can clarify this, that sidewalks are frequently done on Sundays. This is, I personally do see a problem with it being on a holiday weekend when somebody could choose to have a 3-day weekend. But, could they be a Saturday instead of a Sunday? Is there a reason why they can't? Judy, I don't know.
Well, first of all, the Sunday site visits have been in place since before I was on the commission. The agent is not required to attend. The members of the commission who work during the week can't make sidewalks during working hours. The applicant, the recent sidewalk on Easter Sunday was at the request of the applicant, who wanted it done before the next meeting, which was scheduled for the Monday after Easter Sunday. So it was an accommodation to the applicant.
I think that there were, in the last 6 months or so, from my understanding, there's been 3 different weekends or holiday weekends where there were sidewalks on the holiday weekend. Was it maybe before Columbus Day?
So that one actually was, as I needed to correct this, it was scheduled and then it was rescheduled, so it was not held.
Okay.
It was initially scheduled on that Sunday of Columbus Day, but the New Year's Day was held,
Okay.
which is a holiday that employees are entitled to under the personnel policy.
Yeah.
And as I repeat, the employee is not required to attend the site.
It actually is part of the employee's job responsibilities to attend site walks. I think it is a profoundly disrespectful to employees to present the choice of either missing a work obligation or to give up a holiday that you are entitled to under the personnel policy.
We have discussed this, and the agent can, it is important for the commission members to go visit a site. The commission then makes the decision as to what conditions are appropriate for work to be done. And that requires looking at the site. Can't just tell it from a piece of paper. And the agent can, we can arrange with the applicant for the agent to be allowed to go out and take a look at the site during working hours and communicate to the agent anything that occurred during the site walk at which the agent was not present. And I think that that covers the work conditions and allows the commission to perform its responsibilities too.
So Judy, would that require the applicant's consultant to make 2 separate sidewalks?
No, the applicant's consultant wouldn't have to go out.
So they would go with the commission or with the agent?
Go out with the commission. And then the commission will relay to the agent any kind of changes that were made and why they were made. And then the agent can go take a look.
What's wrong with Saturdays?
Some people have other obligations on Saturday.
But that's life. I mean, some people have a lot of obligations on
Oh, so what is the
all
difference?
days.
Why is Sunday any more, less desirable than Saturday?
I think if it's a 3-day weekend, that would be in the middle of the weekend, whereas if it was a Saturday, we should have Sunday, Monday off, maybe.
That's exactly what I was thinking and how I wrote it.
And if all you're talking about are 3-day weekends, I don't think that's a problem.
That's all I'm talking about here is 3-day weekends or recognized holidays, whether that's, I listed those recognized in the personnel policy, so that would include, Monday holidays and so forth. But I specified Easter Sunday just because it's not listed as a recognized holiday because it's not commonly a work day. But to me, it was kind of beyond the pale to schedule a
Well,
site visit.
that was scheduled after the request of the applicant.
I know, but you could tell the applicant to pounce in, that's,
Well,
some
we tried
things,
to accommodate, and the agent did not voice any objection to that schedule.
This is not about any individual. This is about trying to have fair and consistent working conditions for comparable employees in comparable positions. And there are not other comparable positions in this town that are routinely asked to attend site visits on Sundays in general, never mind holidays. So, but this doesn't say anything about Sundays in general or Saturdays in general. But if you look at, whether it's the town planner or the health agent or the building inspector, that's not part of their regular work is to be expected to show up to work on Sunday morning. So I think it is a issue of kind of working conditions and morale, not for any one individual. This is something that, in my understanding, has been a morale issue for upwards of 2 decades in that department.
I disagree with that assessment, but. no.
I wouldn't say it if I didn't have a basis to say it, so.
I mean, I can see someone wants to get their work done on their house and they want their wiring inspected, and can you do it on Sunday? And they're not gonna do it.
Judy, how many sidewalks typically are there on in a typical month? Maybe there isn't such a thing as a typical month, but,
Just then every application comes to the sidewalk.
yeah, so I guess, I think that Merrimack does all the sidewalks on one day a month. Is that true? Is that a model that doesn't work? Is that?
It depends, no, what you want
Yeah.
to do is, we have meetings every 2 weeks. Merrimack
Yeah.
only meets once a month.
Yeah,
We have meetings every 2 weeks, so we try to get the sidewalk in. We have the first meeting, the initial meeting, where the public hearing is open and the project is explained by the applicant representative. We schedule a sidewalk to occur before the next meeting so that we can close the hearing and make a decision at the next meeting. So it's somewhere within the 2 week span. One of those weeks.
yeah. And, are you generally able to consolidate those into just one day? If there's more than one
Yeah,
sidewalk?
we will do more than one sidewalk on the day.
Well, I certainly agree with the holiday weekend issue. And I think it does, you know, as Angus had noted, I think it, in the job description, I think it does say that that this conservation agent is expected to attend. I don't recall exactly how it's phrased, but
On-site inspections related to filing permit compliance monitoring violations.
okay. Also known as sidewalks.
You know, and the job ad did specify attendance at some evening meetings and weekend site walks required. So that's not part of the routine work.
Yeah.
But to me, that in my observation, I think there ought to be a limit with all this. And it sounds like maybe that's not
Okay.
going to be a big problem. So.
So Angus, those, those hours, when, if you would be required to work on, you know, on a holiday, would those be at time and a half? Or what's the-
They're not. That's actually a question that did come up and we reviewed it with Labor Council, and there is not an inherent time and a half for working on a Sunday or on a holiday. You don't get that till you get the 40 hours. In retail, there is extra money for working on Sunday, which I think has something to do with the blue laws, I'm told, but there is nothing in our line of work that inherently does that. One thing I've done with, you know, for instance, with the Council on Aging Director, you know, part of that position's responsibility is Memorial Day parade. Memorial Day is one of the holidays that employees entitled to. So in the offer letter, I said, you know, understanding you might some years have to work Memorial Day, you could take a different day off as a holiday. I thought that, you know, seemed fair. So, you know, there could be something that ends up getting put into personnel policy that helps to, you know, make people whole or at least take the edge off. That was kind of a, you know, one-off because that was a unique position and it seemed fair because like in the personnel policy, you're saying you get these holidays and then, oh, by the way, you have to work every Memorial.
Right.
It's just not like fair. So, and this is someone who's, as you know, worked lots of weekends and lots of holidays. I'm not talking about working extra to get your job done. I'm talking about required events that you have to be at, which to me is a different thing. Yeah, there isn't anything in state law or wage law that provides for an extra rate of pay.
What about a stipend for weekend site visits?
Those are things we could look at. I mean, as you know, in union contracts, there's callback pay and there's union contracts have, you know, sometimes incentive or extra rate for certain holidays. You know, right now, those don't apply to non-union employees, but that's something that could.
Could that come from the
Look
wetlands fund, Judy? I mean, that is clearly to further the, you know, that way it wouldn't have to be part of the Concom budget. I mean, I feel like the agent should be compensated, you know, because they already have, you know, trouble, you know, probably meeting the demands of their regular office hours during the week, you know, so to take a day off on Thursday so that they can do a weekend sidewalk is probably challenging. So I wanted just to compensate them for having to be given the weekend if some allowance could be made. Yeah. I don't know how you would determine what's a fair stipend, but
So the stipend would be per site, how would,
yeah, for sidewalk.
yeah.
We're just getting lump sums. We don't have to get over something.
Is, what is, I guess in a sidewalk, the duration of a sidewalk can be pretty highly variable.
Yeah, it'd be 30 minutes. It could be 3 hours.
I think there should be a minimum, you know, typically if you get called back to work, you get a minimum, you know, 2 hours, 4 hours.
I mean, most of them are not that long.
Yeah. It seems like that's conservation, the only department really where, you know, the commission or the board.
Actually goes out.
Right.
Look,
Right, so I just, you know, so it is different. So I'm just trying to think of a way to not have the agent be, you know, not penalized, but have the agent be compensated, you know.
Maybe it would be a flat amount up to 2 hours, and then if it's really one sidewalk, another, you know, doubling of the flat, you know, and increments. Could it be stipended? I mean, it's.
Well, right now, you know, it's put on the timesheet. It's, you know, it's part of their, yeah. But there's not an additional rate of pay. I hadn't, that's not what I
Plus,
proposed.
you can do.
But if the agent's getting paid for that weekend, then they're giving up, they're like not working during the week, so that they have.
I know, it's.
That's right.
It's
That's right.
really, it's really, inconvenient is beyond what it is, yeah. Like someone can't plan to, I don't know, if someone wants to, whatever they wanna do, once someone wants to go skiing, they can't go. Because it's in the middle of a weekend day.
Right.
Okay. So, you know, this would be a change, this would be a policy change, so, so I don't think we can. Well, can we or can we not make a motion to vote on this tonight, or do we need to be, does the policy not need to be on the agenda as a policy change? I think
It's up to what standard you want to set. Yeah, and it's not a personnel policy. I mean, the reason I smile is, you know, when I started working for this town,
It's not.
there wouldn't even be something on the agenda, and there'd be a motion to adopt a policy, a second, all those in favor, and it was, my head would spin. So we put it on the agenda in an effort to, but, you know, so there's nothing that requires a hearing, but unlike the personnel policies, which is different, so. It's just on for discussion. I mean, if you wanted to put it on for a vote at a future meeting, you could, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm fully
I just-
supportive, but I sort of think it'd be more legitimate to put it on as an agenda item. At the same time,
Okay,
and which, because we talked about it, hopefully we can do in 5 minutes, you know. Just today, actually, as soon as Archie left, did you notice that? As soon as
I
we
did
left,
notice
we
that. He
blew
was
through
there.
like
I was
5
gonna say,
minutes.
20 items,
We
pretty
made
quick.
5 minutes, it's like. I don't know, I don't know what to do with that.
No comment.
I don't know, it was fair, it was fun.
all right, so you want to, I put that on as
Sure.
a proposed policy on the next agenda?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm, just so you know, I'm thinking no Sundays, so that's what I.
Oh, okay, oh, so it will be more than 5 minutes, but, okay, well, there's a vote.
Well, I would just point out that Sunday, has a religious basis to it. I mean, people that are Christian Saturday, it's
Right.
not Sunday, so.
I guess I'm like thinking, like to Angus, like just the old blue laws and everything else. that-
Yeah, but that's why they dumped the old blue laws.
It's literally.
Saturday has
There was a
been
reason.
significant for other people.
Right. Yeah, so, gee, well, I guess the Concom will be meeting again between now and then, because it'd be good.
We're meeting on May 2nd.
May 2nd, okay,
It should be May 9th would be our.
right, yeah.
board
But
session.
okay, having said that, wouldn't it be better to at least have one day that either Saturday or Sunday that
That you can plan on.
then somebody could count on having free?
So would you suggest then that, if Saturday isn't possible for the Concom to use for sidewalks, would it make sense then to, in this new policy to say that Saturdays are reserved as days, as not as being sidewalk days?
Well, in other words, I don't think it would be fair at all that you'd have to do one on a Saturday and one on a Sunday.
Right.
In the same weekend.
That has never happened.
Okay, well, I didn't know that.
Well, other than
You were trying
if,
to say that
they-
in general terms, it's that one day or the other would never be used. Is that what you were suggesting?
so, I mean, you could have something separate to say not more than one day within any weekend, but in terms of the Saturday and Sunday, it hasn't happened driven by this town, but it has in fact happened with a specific employee who's had site walks scheduled on the same Saturday and Sunday of the same weekend because of the two sides of the river. So that has in fact happened. So, you can well see this is something that's not great from it's also it's clearly becomes a quality of life issue, for an employee and a clearly differentiating factor between other similar employees. This is not a salaried on the clock 24/7 job. So it is a material issue, and that's why I bring it forward.
So someone's gonna do something on, so Judy, when the sidewalk is, like you say, you don't know if it's gonna be half an hour or 3 hours or whatever, but would you know that in advance, or someone gets there and you don't even know until you're doing it?
Well, you can't really tell. It depends on whether the delineation is a good one or not. What you're doing on these sidewalks is the site has been flagged by a wetland scientist. We are going out to confirm the line. So it, depending on what the site is, will determine how long it's going to take. You may have to dig a lot of holes. You're looking at soils. So you may be digging a lot of holes. It may be an area where you have a very steeply defined bank and you don't need to poke a lot of holes. So you just can't tell until you get out there.
No, I guess I was thinking just, again, in terms of the agent, if they would, they don't even know if, it's gonna be at 3:30 and at least I'll get through by 4, or they don't know if it's gonna go till, so that sometimes sometimes you don't know, because that's the answer. So how do they plan their week, their forthcoming week, if, that on Sunday that took, I just wanna know how it works.
Well, that's one of the.
Sunday they used up 3 hours, so now on Monday they work 3 hours less, or how does it work?
That's, as you know, one of the challenges that we're dealing with is how to find a way to get the work done within the budgeted hours. And that's been a consistent challenge, partly because of the unpredictability of a lot of aspects of the job.
No, but that's what I mean, so the agent has to go home 3 hours early, or they pick Thursday, or how does it work?
That's somewhat flexible week to week. I mean, typically the Thursday is kind of seen as the safety valve day, so that if that can end up being a short day, so that the hours for the week or the payroll period don't exceed budget, that's ideal. We have had a 2 or 3 instances when there was like commitments on Thursday that drove the overall hours above the budgeted hours for that pay period, or in some cases drove the hours within a single week above 40, which triggers the overtime and time and a half. So it's been a real challenge, partly because I think, the work is being done to a level of diligence that is, takes time. So it's been a real challenge, keeping the work within the budgeted hours, and then compounded by, 2 sides of the river. And obviously the bridge has been a huge problem.
The agent could be working 5 hours on 7 days in a row.
Theoretically, sure.
Okay.
And that has raised, questions as to whether
That's not fair.
Well, so for instance, on mileage reimbursement, we all know you don't get reimbursed for your commute to and from work, but once you're at work and you go to a third place, that's when you get reimbursement. The questions come up as to, if someone works all week and then goes to another site visit on the weekend, is that time counted toward mileage? Is that time counted toward their work schedule? And if you have someone with not a short commute, those are material issues. So these are all some of the complexities that, we're just working through with this MOU, the first time we've done a formal intermunicipal agreement, but those are some of the thorny issues that come up.
So would a stipend for a sidewalk run into potential problems? If the actual time put in pushed you over 40 hours, but you were paid a stipend.
Yeah, I think that would be problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the idea of a stipend doesn't sit real well.
Yeah, okay.
Because at the end of the day, we're bound by wage law.
Yeah,
And
right.
so,
So the planning board, similar type work, but they don't go on sidewalks. So is it,
Not very often.
yeah, I mean, I went to one that's a planning board. So is that because they have a consultant that is working on their behalf?
I don't know. When I was a town planner, we definitely, I was out in the field quite a lot as the planner. Sometimes we would do site walks. It wasn't like every project. It's a very different type of review. But I don't know how they handle that.
I was just wondering if the commission had a consultant doing their own consultant doing the confirmation of the delineation, that perhaps the commission would need to go.
Well, it's not just the delineation. I mean, you get a sense of what kind of controls you need by looking at the actual slope and proximity and what kind of vegetation you have there. So it's not, it's the redelineating, confirming the delineation that takes the most time.
But that's what I'm saying, maybe
But
that's,
you still have to go out. It's not going to do away with the need to make a site visit.
I think, Wendy, to your point, I think there are towns that do rely on their third-party consultants who validate the lines. That's not been the practice here, and it is the commission's authority, not the consultant's authority. But there's definitely towns that look to their consultant to validate or correct the lines.
So as far as trying to figure out how this all fits with a budget, so there is, what's the name of the fund that the Concom?
It's not revolving, but it's like the wetlands fund, but yeah.
And so is it possible that could be used to cover the cost of sidewalks exclusive? Well,
then you get into overtime.
and so would the accounting software here support that, where it could be taken, partly paid from the normal?
It could, yeah. That fund is, that fund subject to. Yeah, it could be paid from. It does get a little messy when you start paying wages out of non-wage accounts, just for like reporting for auditors and for tax purposes.
And the fund was originally designed for consultants.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a Department of Revenue defines what the eligible uses are, for that fund. And as long as they're eligible and have the approval of both the commission and the town manager, they can be expended for anything eligible. But that ends up becoming a policy decision.
Well, right now they're being expended for administrative, 3 hours.
No, I don't believe there's anything coming out of the wetlands fund.
And that fund continues to grow, right? It's not.
That was last fiscal year.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's eliminated.
Well, no, it wasn't eliminated. We just, in the current fiscal year, we budgeted the full 25 hours in the operating budget. And in terms of last year, I don't recall that really, came up. I mean, I know it was discussed, but I don't know if that was because I don't know if the agent maybe wasn't working above the 22 hours that were in the operating budget. I'm not sure what, but I don't remember funds I remember the discussion,
Yeah.
but I don't actually remember funds coming out of that wetlands account. I don't remember any activity in that account.
So that fund is intended to pay for a consultant.
For example, we had a project where there was a proposal to do horizontal drilling underneath the wetland.
Yeah,
And we hired a consultant to evaluate that project for us. So that's beyond our expertise.
yeah.
But doesn't the language say that any activities that further the interests of the law? Isn't that, I mean, so it could be much broader than consult. Do you recall?
I mean, I don't remember it exactly. It is basically, it defines a number of eligible uses that advance the protection of the resources. So I think if the commission wanted to expend it that way, I think they could, but
I'm just saying what it has been used for.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that, given that we're consistently pushing up at the limit of the hours that are budgeted.
consistently exceeding. Yeah.
Consistently exceeding.
Yeah, it's not a sustainable situation as we start to get into the busy season now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest concern this is where we're at. And we're not even in construction season, or we're just now starting.
So is there any reason why the funds haven't been used for, for other purposes?
There really hasn't been a financial issue. You partly because the position was vacant for, the first
Yeah,
2+ months of the year. So there was
Right.
nothing spent. So that the conservation wage and salary line is on track to underspend. So it's not been a financial issue as much as kind of anticipating that it will become an issue. Because for next year, we budgeted for 40, the combined 40 hours a week. So this current fiscal year, I've been able to be, flexible on a case-by-case basis to allow, to authorize the work above budgeted, knowing that there was some slack in that particular line of the budget because it was vacant for a couple of months.
yeah.
So,
Okay. So I guess, well, we resolve, we'll vote on a policy and I think that policy is going to be to exclude holiday weekend scheduling on holiday weekends. Archie, I understand you may have other thoughts, but that's at least I think what we're going into it with. Can discuss at that point, but
Are you going to formalize your proposals for your next meeting?
I can send it to you. It's written up in a memo, so it's all spelled out. So.
yeah, and then Judy, I don't know if the Concom, but if your next Concom meeting, if you have time, if you can sort of discuss the possibility of whether the wetlands fund could be applicable to, looking forward to, past this budget cycle where there was, as Angus said, there was extra money essentially because the position was on staff for a couple of months. But, after June 30th, we'll be in the next fiscal year. Are those funds available, say, for a sidewalk? And I understand, Angus, the complexity of it not being a wage account, so maybe it doesn't work, but I'm just looking for options,
But even that, I mean, that's something that can happen from an accounting standpoint, like.
After the crash of the 2008, that account had been used for wages.
You could do it in I think administratively, the simplest way would be to simply pay it year round out of the wage account. And then at the end of the fiscal year, do a one-time transfer.
Okay.
So you're not muddying up
Oh,
like
okay.
all the payrolls.
Okay.
You just do a one-time transfer to
Yeah.
bring that account back into balance.
Okay.
That wouldn't be that big a deal.
Okay. And, maybe it would be used for sidewalks specifically, because, not to deplete the account excessively. Because I think I heard at one point, I mean, that account is essentially continued on a growth trajectory, right? So it means it's.
We have
it's just-
attempted to use it frugally.
Yeah. But, there's a boundary. We don't want to just keep growing it forever, because then it's, it's stranded funds essentially that could be used for something productive. Anyway, so we'll do that next meeting. And, here we go. So the next, I guess you would update on the Laughing Foundations.
Yeah, so attended the summit, 2 steps forward against anti-Semitism summit, and there were really 2 recommended actions that were recommended of municipalities. And I talked to Rick about this, last week, and where one of them, or really the primary one, is to recognize International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and recognizing January as Holocaust Education Month. Wouldn't really be timely in April. So, but I think we felt that where this summit was recent, it was in the paper. It made sense to have some follow-up as to what might be some tangible action steps. And so I think that's something that we would note, in our calendar for, maybe December, to bring to the board to see about voting a proclamation or something like that for January. So it's nothing I'm asking the board to vote tonight, but I wanted to kind of bring it forward while it was fresh in mind. There's also the, working definition of anti-Semitism. That seems maybe a little bit far afield from the type of things that this board would normally vote. So I would think, a recognition of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and or Holocaust Education Month would be, a good step to take on an annual basis, just to, keep a somewhat high profile for, for this issue.
Were there other, towns in this area?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Newbury?
Yep, Salisbury and Newburyport, Amesbury. Yeah, there was a lot of representation. It was by Zoom, so I think it would have been probably more effective if it was in person.
Yeah.
And I think it was initially attended that way, but it was by Zoom. So, with 150 people, it was, kind of a lot of, but it was, it was meaningful what was said. So. So that's really just informational at this point, but we'll add that to our calendar for closer to the end of the calendar year. And then item O is also informational, the memo from the assessor and the board. At the time this was written, this was the recommendation of the chief assessor to the board. The Board of Assessors has since voted this. So basically this transfers $100,000 to the overlay surplus account, which you probably remember from a couple of years ago at the fall town meeting, is analogous to free cash. It was used a couple of years ago.
Except it's
to offset.
better than free cash because you can use it immediately.
Yeah. So it's basically,
It doesn't have to be certified.
that's correct. Yeah. So, and even with that, transfer, there's still a healthy overlay balance. So,
So could, I know that probably the answer is no, it's too complicated, but we couldn't use this to lower the tax rate immediately, so we could.
not for the current tax year, because the tax bills have already.
I know.
Yeah.
So in other words, free cash, it has to be certified, but this essentially is certified once the assessors have voted this. So this is money that you could spend tomorrow.
It could be applied in the fall.
Yeah, I don't think you could, I think it's still, I think it would still require appropriation. I don't think it can be used for any lawful purpose, but I think it still does need to be appropriated by the legislative body. I don't.
It does.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
does, yes, absolutely. We
Yeah.
voted- we
Yeah, so
have
town
done this
meeting could
before.
use it for
Yes.
anything they wanted to. But at the end of this fiscal year, it would close to free cash, and you'd see a bump in the free cash balance. So it's really just informational.
Somebody's good news.
Yeah, it's great news. I think it's great news. And I think we're trying to be, overlay is always a tricky thing because you want to make sure you've got enough it's basically the fudge factor in terms of either abatements that are approved or if you project certain revenues for excise tax or whatever, and the actual revenues don't match your projections, it's to make sure that you're still balancing your budget. But if you set your overlay too much and you don't draw it down over the years, it can build up. And I do think when I started a few years ago, it was they were just like putting in like 125 a year. And it's like 125 a year is a lot in a town this size.
Well, they also, the municipal thing from the state, the new regulations allow you to bundle several years together. Before you'd have 125 left over from the previous fiscal year, then you had 90 from the previous fiscal year, then 70, and just in case something happened retroactively. But they allow you to say put 2017, 18, and 19 together so that you'd have a pot that could be utilized for each of the 3 years, meaning you didn't have to have quite so much. So then you could give more back.
Yeah. So in our recap model for the FY23 tax rate, which of course we won't close out till roughly November, we're carrying 75,000, which I think is still a bit conservative. It's not, I don't think it's too low, but it's
way less than we used to.
That's right. The intent is to not overtax people.
Right.
There's an idea. So that's all I've got.
Okay.
It's not 11:30 yet.
I know.
I feel unsatisfied.
So gotta work on it.
Put that paper down.
No, I do have one quick thing. So, we've at different times talked about, how the town might move forward, exploring a town charter. And is that something that conversation would or should start here with the select board, or where should that conversation start? If we were to explore that seriously, I'm not sure of how to, sort of in preparation season, we're coming towards the end of the fiscal year, and there'll be various changes going on. Is it a time to start thinking about whether or not that's something we pursue?
I think it's a great thing to talk about. It's definitely, there's a lot to talk about. It's something that the auditor has recommended that the town consider. I think there's really 3 different ways in my understanding of how towns go about this. If a town has already decided it wants to create a town charter, it could set up a charter commission. That's kind of a high stakes body that's elected that has to deliver a charter back to the voters directly within, I think it's 18 months from the election. That's like if you already know that's what you want to do. Another would be like a town charter study committee, which would kind of presuppose that you're trying to get to a town charter. And it would be more based on like what that charter might look like, but that would be an advisory committee, non-binding advisory to the select board. The third, which I consider kind of the lowest tier, is like a town government study committee, which is a much more like no predetermined outcome, just what's working well, what's not. I'd like to think that that type of work is what led to the Town Manager Act of 2017, was kind of a recognition that there ought to be some change in the form of government to make things more efficient, more transparent, more professional, whatever the objectives were. But I think it's a great thing to talk about. I think if there hadn't been, already recommendations from the auditors and elsewhere that a town charter makes sense, maybe you'd start with more of like a cast a wide net of just kind of start, I think there's enough there to justify, I think the town would benefit from a charter. I really do. I think there's a lot of ambiguity that we see quite a bit. And I think there's opportunities the town misses because of the form of government that we have. So I think if you as a board see it the same way, then I don't think it would be a bad idea to consider initiating a town charter committee and maybe give them a year to study, maybe give them 18 months to study, but an advisory committee on what that might look like and what things might change and what things might stay the same. But I think if there wasn't all the background, you might want to just start with like a committee. But I think if you've already got some thoughts on it, maybe you start with like a town charter committee.
Yeah, I think.
But I do have a lot of print materials on it that I could put into a packet that would be great to talk about, because there's a lot of different ways to talk about form of government. But right now we have a complicated form of government.
Yeah. Well, there's a fair number of ambiguities in it, and those would be good to eliminate, and that would just be good to make it, as sort of efficient and responsive as possible.
So what kind of time commitment would that require of you?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think it would be one thing I intended to do at the next meeting, because that would be the first meeting after the election, which would be when the board would typically reorganize, is I was going to put together, we had that, what I think was a really nice goal setting session in February, but we really didn't do any follow-up, which isn't a huge surprise just because February, March, April's been so busy. But what I was going to do is take what each of you gave me as terms of what you had identified as, and to give like a little report on that, so that whoever's the new chair, ideally we can set like a work plan for the year ahead and really take stock of what are we already committed to, and what does that leave in terms of additional capacity to take on new things. And if that's nothing, that's nothing. If that's just a couple of things, we're going to need to be strategic about that. But I think a good starting point is to take stock of what we've already committed to, whether that's things we want to do, like MVP grants, or whether that's things we have to do, like MBTA legislation or updating hazard mitigation plans, or things that we have to do and we have to find the time for. I think it would take a fair amount of time, but when I look at the amount of time that we lose based on inefficiency, it's unfortunately, it's kind of like can't redesign the bus while driving the bus, and right now we're driving the bus kind of full speed. It would take a lot of time, but I think there's some things that have become clear in the last 4 years and maybe longer for Archie, who's been at this quite a while, that just are inherently unclear, inherently inefficient, and in some cases, I mean, in order to really understand how West Newbury works, unlike a town with a town charter, you can read the town charter. In West Newbury, you really need to read the Town Manager Act, read another dozen anyway statutes that are kind of incorporated by reference, then read the bylaws, then read the policies, and then look at like what's actual practice. We've come a long way in terms of getting things into written policy. I think we've made a lot of progress in the last few years. But it still is kind of a Frankenstein of a lot of different parts. There's not like a cohesive write-up that would help someone understand how we function. And I do think the more that the voters and the taxpayers understand the types of opportunities that the town really can't pursue in the current form of government, I think people would say, geez, we ought to pursue those. And well, either, you know, in the current form of government, it's impractical or impossible. I don't think we've talked enough about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what it was like before the Town Manager Act. I mean, with the load that's here currently, what I see being done currently, I can't imagine how you guys kept your kept it going. My guess is the demands have increased some of the time, but you know, if we could streamline, make things work even better, it would be good.
All I can say is we had policies and then we'd forgotten about them. And then we, 2 years later, told exactly the opposite of what we told 2 years, simply because no one could remember. I'm not making this up. I believe it.
I do too.
But you couldn't, there's too much stuff.
It was happening so fast. And those, you know, the handful of people at the staff level who were coming to your meetings were trying to scramble to keep up. They couldn't keep up. It just happened so fast. And
Yeah, well, and then the fact that there were, you know, 4 finance directors over the course of 5 or 6 years or 7 years, whatever
Yeah.
it was, and, you know, 3 accountants and down in the, you know, there's no continuity, no institutional memory, no, you know.
yeah. The baseline functions were not healthy.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that's come a long, long way.
Yeah.
And you know, that in and of itself
We
is
would always get good glowing reports from the so-and-so is doing a great job and so-and-so is doing a great job. Well, I'm not kidding.
Right.
And, you know, we say a lot about the auditor, but he gave glowing remarks to people that were, can I say?
well, the financial statements were strong, but the audit management letters definitely had a number of, you know, orange flags, if not red flags, you know, just years and years and years of issues that would come up like year after year after year. You know, cash doesn't tie, you know, some of the things that went on were, and money was never missing. I've said that before. There was never any money missing. It was just a matter of not having the right, you know, process or the right staffing levels. But, you know, and also that chart of accounts was a mess, but, you know, revenues were posted the wrong accounts and wire transfers coming in from the Commonwealth weren't posted to the end of the fiscal year. So for the entire year, the treasurers and the accountants numbers wouldn't tie because they weren't timely posting. I mean, it was just, oh, it was a mess. So anyway.
Jen's out.
Jen's
It's time to go, guys.
So, but I think that there was a lot, when I started, I feel like there was a lot of backlog of people out in the community who had a lot of needs or expectations or wants of the town offices that weren't being met. And that's part of how, when I started, I felt like it was kind of drinking from the fire hose, because left, right, and center, there was a backlog of things. And it did start to feel like they hadn't really felt like there was a go-to person or place. And so that meant a lot of things landed on my desk that were very clearly more than could be taken on in a single cycle or year or even a couple of years. There was just too much. And then the baseline stuff is really what takes an enormous amount of time. So progress has been made, but you know, one of the things I would look for in whether in a town charter or just an improved streamlining of government is clear relationships between different staff people and different boards, committees, and commissions, because the 30 or so committees and commissions we have are so integral to how the town runs. But if you look at the number of staff people who actually have dedicated relationships with those boards, committees, and commissions, there's very few. So that leaves a lot of committees and commissions and boards with little, if any, tangible relationship to the actual, professional and administrative staff that are working here every day. And that is where you can start to get misalignment or disconnection between kind of policy objectives and the ability to actually carry forward the work. So some of the better managed towns I've seen have had, clear relationships established, whether through job descriptions or where, more staff were more engaged with what goes on in after hours and not just leaving at the end of the workday and leaving for a couple of us that are, not just, there's a few of us, but there's almost like the daytime world and the nighttime world are really two different things in town government. And some of us straddle both. But most staff don't. And so that's a challenge for those who do to kind of communicate like this is the policy direct when, they got day jobs to do. So a lot of it falls disproportionately. And I think part of that is we get a lot of part-time staff, more than I've ever seen. But
Probably seemed like an inexpensive way to build things at the time.
yeah, you need it. It's a small town.
Remember, we have no industrial base whatsoever. We have high taxes because the only people who pay any taxes in this town are the residents. We have zero business. Other than Oxford, we're probably tied for the highest percentage of the tax base paid by residents.
I have one question that I'm gonna ask before we adjourn. Somebody wrote to the select board email asking if when we have like town races and stuff, if residents could be notified. I guess they're on Middle Road, they have to get out of the driveway on the race. Seems kind of onerous to notify every resident, but they used to put signs up like at intersections saying
Right.
road race,
Right,
maybe
right.
this weekend or whatever. So I don't know if that's something we could add to the application.
Yeah,
Yeah, it would
Yeah,
make sense.
yeah.
And then, say a week before something, the race organizer would have, could put out some, think about it, the apple harvest does that. And that's partly probably to gain participation, but it is a great way of, a week or two beforehand. For the days of virtual races, they would put out signs, and know where the course was going to be, and yeah, it's a good idea.
So what we did was some good application.
I'm trying to remember that.
I made a note of that too. Yeah, it's
They're also posted online.
yeah, we post it online easily enough. That's for sure.
But that's
But,
when somebody goes to that website.
Yeah. But I know, I think
Just one
posting-
more way
yeah.
for people to know.
Right.
Yeah. Great. All right.
All right,
Oh, yeah, I did want to, so Rick, remind us what are the dates that you're going to be out of town?
I'll be gone from the 15th to the 30th.
Oh,
I'll be back the day before Memorial Day.
okay. What time do you leave on the 15th?
In the evening.
Okay, the reason I ask is I'm praying for no rain on the 14th.
I agree. Out of 5.
Because I didn't even think it through, but I've got a hotel in Boston Saturday night. I'm going to see Riverdance Sunday. So if it rains and town meetings on Sunday, I'm going to be really bummed. I'll be at town meeting, but I will be really bummed. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
I didn't even think, I just was like, oh, town meeting's the 14th. And then after I booked it, I'm like, it could rain.
So, yeah, obviously this is
Everybody
not,
bring an umbrella.
obviously this is not an agenda topic, so I guess, But I meant to last week, and somehow got distracted by everything else, when we met with the moderator and FinCom and
We talked for an hour about or related there.
I know. So it occurred to me that, you know, the COVID situation has changed considerably. We're all sitting here without masks. And pretty much everywhere you go now, people are without masks. And the people who are concerned wear masks. And it's been reasonably well demonstrated that one person wearing a mask is not as effective as two, but it's quite effective. I'm just wondering, could we have a fallback? Is it too late to consider a fallback where if the weather is looking bad, we adjourn to the annex? And I know this is not on the agenda, so I don't know if this is legit too, but.
Yeah, we don't have time to, it's important.
Right.
I mean, I was gonna say it's not too late in terms of the FinCom booklet.
Yeah.
But it would rely on the board, you know, deciding that tonight, which,
Well, it was even just a journey. I mean,
Yeah.
it's legitimate if the, you know, we could, I don't know how exactly how we do it, but I mean, we could just immediately adjourn to the annex.
Well, we would adjourn, but yes, we would.
Okay.
Yeah, just-
Recess.
Recess,
to the
yeah.
annex. Thanks.
Everyone can pick up their chair and go in.
yeah, or I mean, or DPW could have set up the chair, you know, presumably
Assuming
they would have seen the rain
Right.
coming, they could do the setup.
Oh,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and then you could, you know.
We could use the code red to.
Yep.
To advise all residents.
Yeah.
Everybody signed up that,
Mhm.
that the meeting was, because it says, I don't recall, I think it says the bandstand area.
Mhm.
Well,
So if we're gonna do that, why don't we just have it inside?
it's a good question. I personally would like the outside meetings, but I'm not.
Just to, you know, try to avoid two different setups, but I guess if it was forecast enough in advance.
Right. Well, I think you'd know.
I think you'd have to set up one, you can't get the AV stuff
Right. Yeah.
both places, no.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems to me that you would, you know, you would know the day before.
Decide on Friday.
You could make a decision the day before.
It's always weird though, but forecast now would say the daily chance of rain is 80%, and then you look at the hourly,
Yeah.
and
there's
it's
nothing-
like 5% or 10% for 1 hour. Wait a minute, something's not right here. The computer, the algorithm for the prediction, it does, the hourly never matches the day.
On occasion.
The
Yeah.
6 copies.
But I can say that it's definitely on occasion.
That's Archie.
Yeah.
So that's a good point.
Oh, so this all started with asking Rick his travel plans. So I think, well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, what did the other two board members think if with Rick not here on the 23rd? Do you think that meeting that day with a 2-member board is okay? Or do you think we ought to be looking at rejiggering meeting schedule?
Well, after town meeting, isn't it usually 12? What do you think about the full agenda?
It's too soon to say. I mean, right now, I do know that the June meetings, let's see, didn't we pencil in?
Right now, there's nothing on the 23rd.
No, that's not true. There is, we have the concept plan for the page audit on the 23rd for the page safety audit.
There's nothing in the file.
Oh, okay, yeah, just on my notes here.
Probably. But I think we're all signing in the right place.
Well, there's only one place for you to sign above your name.
It could probably be, wait, so what are we looking at, the 23rd? Yeah. I think we're gonna be better off just sticking with the schedule. Even if there's not, I think we should try to keep it as, light as we can with one member short, but I think we should stick with the schedule. I think once we get into, maybe May, second meeting of May or something, we ought to look at the summer schedule and see if there can be some adjustments there. Because the bi-weekly is tough, because if, for instance, if I take a week vacation, it means I either miss a meeting or I miss the week leading up to a meeting, which is very difficult either way. So in the past, I think, and not just my schedule, other schedules too, sometimes it has worked well to either skip a meeting or like go 2 off, 2 on, something just to make some adjustment for that week off scenario.
Motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor? Aye.